Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. They say the house doesn't just watch, it waits. Not for anyone in particular, but for the one who won't leave. The one too curious to ignore the whispers, too prideful to run when the cold breath of something else grazes their neck. And in the small town of Millfield, on a street no longer found on maps, stands that house. Boarded up windows, crooked porch steps, a mailbox that hasn't known a letter in decades. But there's a reason no one dares to touch it. Because the last people who tried were never heard from again, and no one, not even the sheriff, ever opened the front door. Until tonight. It started with blood, not in a gory, splattered on the walls kind of way. No, this was quieter, more personal. The kind of blood that trickles under your fingernails when you dig too deep into secrets that were never yours to find. Emma Caldwell didn't know that yet, not when she slid behind the wheel of her rusted Jeep and flicked her flashlight toward the broken down sign ahead. Millfield, Pop, 4/9/20 it read. Someone had crossed it out with red spray paint. Beneath it, in letters just barely visible beneath decades of grime, someone had scrawled, "Not anymore." Emma had come here for answers. And like most who poke too hard, she thought she'd be the exception. She thought her camera, her research, her gut instinct would keep her safe. She didn't understand what kind of story she was walking into. Not yet. The air was colder than the season allowed. It wrapped around her throat as she stepped out of the Jeep, trailing the fog of her breath like a smoke signal in the dark. No lights in the houses. No flicker of a TV behind curtains. Just silence so deep it almost seemed to hum. She locked the door out of habit, even though there was no one around for miles. Or so she thought. The Caldwell family had roots in Millfield, deep ones. Her great-uncle had lived here until he vanished in 1986. The report said he walked into the woods and never came back, but his neighbors whispered something else. That he went into the house at the end of Wren Hollow Road. The house no one claimed, no one fixed, no one even mentioned anymore. Not since it began. Emma pressed record on her body cam. October 12th, 9:03 p.m. My name is Emma Caldwell. I'm standing at the edge of Wren Hollow Road, investigating the disappearance of my great-uncle Daniel Caldwell. According to all available town records, he was last seen entering the abandoned house on the cul-de-sac. That house, it's still there. And tonight, I'm going in. The gravel crunched underfoot, louder than she expected. It echoed against boarded homes and forgotten mailboxes. She passed a child's bicycle, rusted and still upright, as if dropped in the middle of a game that never finished. One of its wheels slowly spun even though there was no wind. A coincidence? Maybe. But the air was still, unnaturally so. The house loomed at the end of the road. 2 stories of rotted wood and sagging window frames. Its door hung slightly ajar, swaying gently like it was breathing. Emma's stomach tightened. Not out of fear, at least not yet, but anticipation. The kind of anticipation you feel right before something changes forever. She stepped onto the porch. Each board moaned under her weight. The camera in her hand caught the edges of old carvings on the wood, symbols she couldn't place, like a mixture of letters and wounds. Someone had tried to scratch them out, but the grooves had only sunk deeper, like the house didn't want to forget. The door creaked open with a reluctant sigh. Inside it was colder, not just no heater cold. This was biting, ancient cold. The kind that seeps into your bones and whispers to you that something has been waiting in the dark. Waiting too long. Dust floated in the flashlight's beam like ash. Cobwebs sagged from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance, water dripped in slow, methodical intervals. The first thing she noticed was the smell. It wasn't rot, exactly, but something older, like damp earth, rusted iron, and old breath. Breath that didn't belong to her. Emma moved through the foyer, the wood beneath her groaning like it resented her presence. A staircase to her left curled upward like a broken spine, and to her right, a hallway stretched toward the kitchen. Every photo on the wall had been turned backward, every mirror covered in a black sheet. She whispered, more to herself than the camera, "Why would someone cover every mirror?" A soft creak behind her made her spin. Nothing. Just the open door gently swaying. But when she turned back, one of the sheets had fallen, not floated, not pulled, fallen, straight down, like something had been standing there and vanished the moment she looked away. In the mirror, her reflection blinked 1 second too late. She bolted forward, grabbing the sheet and flinging it back over the glass. Her breath quickened, her hands trembled. She whispered again, "You imagined that. You're just jumpy." But she didn't believe herself. She pressed on. Through the kitchen where every cabinet door was ajar. Every one. The floor was littered with silverware, like someone had been rifling through it in panic. Or maybe not someone. She reached the basement door. It wasn't locked, but it had been nailed shut from the outside. The wood was split in several places, like someone, or something, had tried to claw their way out, and on the wall beside the door, written in a deep, dark smear, were the words "Diontiopen, it remem embrs." Her breath caught in her throat. She was about to turn when her camera fizzled. Static, then a brief image, too fast to understand. She rewound it, pausing on a single frame. It showed a man standing at the top of the stairs behind her, a man with no eyes, just dark, empty hollows. His mouth was open as if screaming, but no sound came. She spun again, no one there, but now the basement door was open. The chill had changed. It wasn't just cold, it was wet, like mist was leaking out from the shadows. Something moved in that darkness, a slow scrape, a breath, and then a voice, Emma. Soft, familiar. Her great-uncle's voice. She hadn't heard it in years, only from old recordings and family tapes. She backed away. No, that's not possible. But the voice came again, lower now, more guttural. "Come see what I found." She ran, up the stairs. The wood cracked beneath her feet, but she didn't stop. She burst into a hallway lined with doors. Every one slightly open, every one breathing warm air into the freezing hall. The second door on the left slammed shut as she passed. She froze. A whisper from behind the door. "You shouldn't have come here." Her body screamed at her to run, but her mind was caught between fear and curiosity. She reached for the knob. Her hand brushed against it, and it turned on its own. Inside was a nursery, but the crib was filled with soil. Black, wet, crawling soil. Tiny handprints trailed down the walls, and written above the crib in faded red chalk, "Bury me again." A sudden crash from downstairs. Something heavy. Something angry. Emma slammed the door shut and backed away. Then the lights, if you could call the dim, barely functioning bulbs that, flared once, then died. She was plunged into darkness, and then she heard them. Footsteps on the stairs, heavy, uneven. Dragging something. Her flashlight flickered. The camera on her chest blinked with low battery. And then, silence. She held her breath. 1 step, 2, closer. Then a whisper, right beside her ear. "You were supposed to forget," she screamed. Ran. Through the hallway. Down the stairs. Past the open basement door where something moved, slow and oozing. She didn't stop until she was outside, on the porch, where the air was thick with fog that hadn't been there before. She turned. The door was closed. She hadn't shut it. Emma stumbled backward, hands shaking, breath heaving, chest tight with terror and disbelief. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. One notification, a photo. Of her asleep in the crib full of soil, and beneath it a message, "Welcome home." And that's when the door creaked open again, on its own. But this time, something stepped out. And it was wearing her great-uncle's face, except the eyes weren't right. They were hollow and bleeding. She ran to the Jeep, fumbled with the keys, started it, sped away, not daring to look back. But in the rearview mirror, before the fog swallowed the town whole, she saw the house. And in every window, something watched her. Not someone, something. And it was smiling. The road twisted like a snake shedding its skin in the dark, and Emma gripped the wheel so tight her knuckles went white. She didn't stop driving. Not for the fallen tree branches that scraped her undercarriage. Not for the wild turns or the sudden burst of fog that blurred her vision. Her foot was glued to the gas pedal, as if lifting it would give the thing behind her just enough time to catch up. Her breaths were quick, shallow, every one a reminder she was still alive, still herself. But even as she left that cursed house behind, something felt wrong. Off. Like she had taken more than just fear with her. Like something had followed. The road signs began to disappear, swallowed whole by mist thicker than anything she'd seen before. Her headlights barely pierced it, casting a weak cone of light ahead like a dying torch. She didn't recognize the trees anymore. They stretched too tall, too crooked. Like giant fingers reaching down to twist her path. She should have hit the town's exit 15 minutes ago. But it didn't come. It wouldn't come. That's when she saw it, a child, standing dead center in the road. Emma slammed the brakes. Tires screamed. The Jeep spun sideways and stopped inches from the figure. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it wanted to tear through her skin. She blinked, sweat dripping down her forehead, then looked again. The child was gone. Emma stumbled out of the car, the air biting through her jacket. "Hello," she called out, voice cracking. The fog answered with silence. But then, in the distance, she heard it, a slow, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 like a stick against metal. She turned, heart thudding, and caught a flicker of movement to her left. She raised her flashlight, sweeping across the trees. Nothing. But the tapping grew louder, closer. Tap, tap, tap. She turned the light toward her Jeep and froze. A small handprint was smeared across her windshield. Wet, red. She hadn't heard a sound. No footsteps, no cries. Just the tap, tap, tap. The light trembled in her hand. She moved back toward the driver's side door when the voice came again. This time, from the forest. Emma, the same voice from the house. Her great uncle's, but wrong. Hollow, echoed. She turned and ran into the woods without thinking, away from the voice, away from the fog. Branches clawed at her face. Roots threatened to trip her. She stumbled, falling into the dirt, breathless, heart screaming. When she looked up, her flashlight caught something in the trees, a symbol carved into the bark, the same one she'd seen etched into the house's porch. She gasped. Another one, then another, markings on every tree, a pattern, or a warning. She wasn't sure which was worse. Then she heard the breath again. Not hers. Close, wet. Gurgling, she turned slowly. A figure stood 10 feet away. Pale, too tall, its head tilted at an impossible angle, neck stretched like it had been hung and never fully died. Its arms dragged across the ground, and its mouth, if you could call it that, stretched in a grotesque smile, black ichor oozing between its teeth. It didn't blink, didn't breathe, but it watched. Then it whispered, "You're not supposed to leave." Emma screamed and bolted. Her legs burned. Her lungs threatened to give out, but she didn't stop. Not when the thing began to move. Not when its limbs snapped and popped as it chased her with the sound of twigs breaking under its impossible gait. The woods twisted around her, trees closing in like a trap. She burst into a clearing, gasping, and there, impossibly, was the house, again, back where she started. She doubled over, the truth crashing into her like ice water. The road hadn't looped. She had, or something had brought her back. The house door was open now, wide, waiting. Behind her, the thing in the woods growled, a low, guttural vibration that crawled up her spine. She didn't want to go inside. But it was the only place left to run. She stepped onto the porch. The boards didn't creak this time. They accepted her, welcomed her. Inside, the air had changed. The cold was gone, replaced by a heavy warmth, like breath in a closed coffin. The sheets were off the mirrors now, and in every one, Her reflection stood still while she moved. Watching. Mocking. She staggered into the living room. The furniture had shifted. The couch was gone. The rug now soaked through with something black and thick. In the center of the room sat a box. Old. Wooden. Covered in more of those strange carvings. A note sat on top. You opened the door. Now open the box. Her hands shook. She knew she should, but she lifted the lid. Inside was a tape recorder. Analog dusty. She pressed play. Static. Then a voice. Her great uncle's again, but real this time. Tired. Scared. If you found this, you made it back. Maybe. Or maybe the house is just playing with you again. I don't know anymore. It started with the whispers. Then the dreams. Then I woke up outside, covered in dirt. Every night, like I was being buried. Then dug up, over and over. I tried to leave. Roads twisted. Time blood. Emma, if this is you, if you're listening, don't trust the mirrors. Don't trust the child. And don't open the basement again. Click. The tape ended. Emma sat in silence, the walls creaking softly around her like old lungs taking shallow breaths. She wanted to leave. Every bone in her body told her to get out. But then she heard the sound again. Laughter. A child's giggle. Echoing down the hallway. She stood, turned slowly. A little boy stood at the end of the corridor. Blonde hair, no shoes. His eyes were too wide. Too still. Play with me, he said. She backed away. No, I don't think so. But the boy smiled wider, revealing rows of blackened, needle, thin teeth. You already said yes. He ran, and the hallway stretched with him, the walls cracking open like old wounds as he passed. Emma turned and fled the other way, back toward the stairs. But as she reached the first step, every light in the house blinked once, and the basement door slammed open. A long arm reached out. Not a human one. It was thin, bone-wrapped in leaking flesh. Its hand had too many fingers. Emma screamed as it grabbed her ankle. Pulled. Down the stairs, into the dark. And as she tumbled into that black hole, the last thing she saw before the light died completely was a message scratched into the wall above the stairs. You're home now. Sleep tight. Darkness swallowed her, and this time, she didn't scream. There are different kinds of darkness. Some are gentle, the kind that lulls you into rest, like a warm night under thick blankets. Others are pure absence, colorless, shapeless, empty. But what swallowed Emma as she was dragged into the basement was neither of those. It was an alive darkness, one that pulsed and moved, one that seemed to wrap around her face and push its fingers into her ears, her mouth, her mind. She didn't know how long she fell. The stairs vanished behind her like a dream fading just before waking, and time itself seemed to snap like brittle wood. She wasn't tumbling anymore. She was floating, or suspended. She wasn't sure which was worse. Her arms flailed, trying to find something, anything, to grab onto, but there was nothing. Just thick air and the endless whisper of something that didn't speak in any language she recognized, but still managed to mean something. And then, all at once, the fall stopped. Not with a crash or jolt, it just ended. Like someone pressed pause on gravity itself. She landed on her feet. But the moment they touched the ground, the world shifted again. The basement, if you could call it that, wasn't just under the house anymore. It had expanded, warped. The walls stretched out farther than any basement should, made of crumbling brick and wet soil, as though the house's foundation had grown veins and muscle. The air stank of rot, thick with the scent of decay and something older, something like time left out too long in the sun. Emma raised her flashlight, half expecting it not to work, but the weak beam flickered to life. It caught movement instantly. A shadow darted across the far wall. Her heart seized. She whipped around. Nothing. The beam quivered in her grip, sweeping across mounds of dirt, some of them too round, too symmetrical, like they had been placed there. Buried. Then she saw it. A door at the end of the chamber. Metal. Rusted. Bolted shut with a thick iron bar, which had been torn clean off and lay twisted on the ground like an uncoiled snake. Someone. No, something had broken out. The handle was smeared with dark streaks, dried and cracked, but unmistakably human. Or close to it. She should have gone back. She knew that. Every part of her screamed for it. But something about that door, something about the way it hummed, kept pulling at her. Like it had a voice, and it was calling her by name from behind thick metal and old memories. She stepped closer. As she reached the threshold, her foot struck something. She looked down and nearly screamed. A boot, rotten leather, half submerged in mud, attached to a leg. Her flashlight trembled as she followed the shape up. A skeleton lay just beneath the dirt, mouth open in a frozen gasp. One arm outstretched like it had died trying to claw its way back toward the stairs. Its other hand held something, tightly clenched even in death. Emma knelt, swallowing her terror, and pried the fingers open. A locket. She popped it open, revealing a photo inside. Black and white. A man, her great-uncle, and a little girl. Emma herself, as a toddler. Her blood froze. The date on the photo's edge, 1995. That wasn't possible. She had never been to Millfield as a child. Her parents had always refused. Had sworn up and down they'd never set foot near that town. So how could she be in a photo with a man who vanished 10 years before she was even born? She backed away, heart hammering, until her back hit the door. The hum returned, stronger now, not a sound, but a feeling, like pressure inside her skull, like something wanted out, and then the door creaked open. No one pushed it, it just opened, and the darkness behind it breathed. Emma raised her flashlight and stepped inside. The corridor was narrow. The walls here weren't brick or stone but flesh. Pulsing, living walls that oozed with some slick, black liquid. It didn't make sense. None of this did. Yet her legs kept moving, her steps slow, deliberate, as though some part of her, something older than memory, recognized this place. Whispers began to slither through the tunnel, brushing her ears like cold wind. They said her name. They said other things too, things she didn't want to hear. Dig deeper. You were born here. She left you. That last one made her stop. Who left me? The darkness answered with silence. Until the air changed. It got warm again. Heavy. And suddenly Emma stood not in a tunnel, but in a bedroom. Her childhood bedroom. Posters on the wall. The purple unicorn lamp on her nightstand. Her stuffed bear, the one that vanished when she was 6, lay perfectly upright on the pillow. She stepped forward, dazed, feeling like she was walking through a dream filmed in high definition. Then she saw the figure sitting on the edge of the bed. A woman, facing away, dark hair, pale skin. Familiar in a way that made Emma's stomach churn. Mom. The figure didn't move. Emma stepped closer. Mom? How are you here? Still, no movement. Then the figure spoke, but not with her mother's voice. The tone was flat, childlike, reciting something memorized long ago. She said you were too loud. Said the house could hear you. So she left you at the edge. Thought it wouldn't find you. Emma froze. What are you talking about? She made a trade. One daughter for another. Only the house never forgets, and it never forgives. The figure turned, and it was her mother. But her face was wrong. It shifted constantly, like candle wax melting and reforming. Her eyes were blank, white leaking black tears. Her mouth opened too wide. Emma, she hissed, you should have stayed gone. The room exploded in noise. Screams from all directions. The walls blood. The bear's head turned and whispered, she's not your mother. Emma turned and ran again. The bedroom stretched behind her, twisting into a long hallway of identical doors, each one marked with a symbol from the house's porch. Each one thumping from the inside. She didn't stop. Couldn't. She burst through the last door and landed in dirt. Actual dirt. She was outside again. Or so she thought. She stood in a graveyard, not one with tombstones. These graves were marked with items. A single shoe, a toy car, a rusted dog collar, personal things. Things that meant someone had been here, had lived, had died, and then she saw it. A fresh mound, her name on a wooden sign driven into the earth. Emma Caldwell returned home, her breath caught. Footsteps behind her. She turned. A mirror stood upright in the middle of the field, and in it, she wasn't alone. Beside her reflection stood the child again, the boy from the road, only now his skin was cracking, his smile bleeding. And he whispered we were never meant to wake up. Emma tried to scream, but the air was gone, like the dream was finally ending, and something else was taking its place. Emma didn't remember falling asleep, but she remembered waking up. The worst kind of waking, the kind where your breath comes in too fast, your muscles lock, and for just a second, you don't know who or what you are. She sat up with a jolt, gasping, hands clawing at dirt, real dirt, damp, cold, clinging to her clothes and hair like it had been layered over her while she slept, or while something had buried her. Above her, the sky had no stars, not even a moon, just a thick velvet black that seemed too low, like the sky itself had collapsed closer to the ground. The graveyard was still around her, silent, waiting, but the sign with her name was gone. In its place stood a mirror, the same one from the night before, but now her reflection was missing. Just an empty space where she should have been. The reflection of the sky, the ground, the graves, but not her. Emma stumbled to her feet. Her body ached in strange ways, like she'd been twisted during sleep. She took one step, and the ground beneath her squelched wetly. She looked down. The dirt moved. Not like water or mud, but like it breathed. With every step, it pulsed faintly beneath her boots, almost as if there were something just beneath the surface, something stirring. "Where am I?" she whispered, voice hoarse. A voice answered from the shadows behind her. "You're between." She turned slowly, dread crawling up her spine like icy vines. No one stood there, but the voice continued closer now, whispering directly into her ear. "Not dead. Not alive. Not dreaming. Not awake. You've tasted the house now. And the house, it tastes you back." The air thickened. Emma spun, scanning the rows of strange, item-marked graves. The mirror cracked, one thin line snaking across the glass. A low hum vibrated through the ground, faint but constant, like a distant engine or a creature growling beneath layers of soil and secrets. Then came the laughter. Soft, childlike, but it didn't come from one direction. It echoed from everywhere. She turned and saw them. Children. Not real children. Not anymore. They were translucent, shifting. Faces blurred and limbs too long, joints bending the wrong way. They watched her with glowing eyes, whispering without sound. Their mouths moved, but Emma heard nothing except the growl beneath her feet growing louder. One of them stepped forward, dragging a foot behind him like it was broken. His voice hit the air like a cold slap. "You're in the echo. The house's dream. The place it builds when it doesn't want to let go." Emma shook her head. "This isn't real. I was in the house. I saw my mother." The boy giggled, but it sounded more like a wheeze. "You saw what it wanted you to see. Your mind filled the gaps. That's what it does. It lets you dig your own grave." Suddenly, the children were gone, and the mirror cracked further, 3 long lines now, until it exploded with a screech, shards flying through the air. But nothing hit Emma. Nothing touched her. The shards floated, hovering mid-air like frozen snowflakes. And in their reflections, she was there. But she wasn't herself. She was sleeping. In every single shard, she was curled in a bed of dirt, peaceful, unmoving, pale as death. One shard drifted closer. In that one, her eyes opened and smiled. Emma stumbled back, hands shaking. The ground beneath her began to quake, a low rumble that vibrated her bones. The graves began to collapse inwards, sucked into themselves like sinkholes, and from each something rose. Not people, not even bodies, but pieces. Torsos without arms, legs that moved on their own, heads without mouths but somehow still screaming. These things dragged themselves out of the holes and began to crawl toward her. She turned and ran. The graveyard twisted as she moved. The rows of mounds reformed, stretching into endless corridors of loss and memory. Each marker screamed as she passed, high-pitched wails of people who had been forgotten, people who never got out. Her legs burned, her chest ached, but she didn't stop. Then, without warning, the ground dropped beneath her like a collapsing stage, and she plummeted again. This time, she landed in water, freezing, black water. She surfaced, gasping, and found herself in a vast underground chamber. The ceiling pulsed with veins of flickering light. The water stretched endlessly in every direction, but beneath it movement. Shapes. Something circled her legs. She swam hard, reaching a rocky outcrop nearby, dragging herself onto the jagged edge. Her hands were scraped raw. Her lips blue. But she didn't dare go back into the water, not with what she felt beneath it. Across from her, carved into the wall, was a doorway. It had no frame, no door, just a jagged hole leading into complete blackness. Words were written in ash around it. Ufo archosenjuo nevi arwaki. She didn't want to go in. But the water began to rise behind her. She had no choice. She entered. Inside was pitch black. Her flashlight flickered once, then died completely. She moved forward, hands brushing against the wet stone walls. She could hear them again now, the whispers. But these weren't external. They were inside her mind, like thoughts she never asked for. Why didn't you come sooner? Do you remember what you gave away? She's still here, waiting. Then something touched her hand, soft, cold. Another hand. She yanked back, but it didn't let go. A faint blue glow appeared ahead, just enough light to show her the thing gripping her hand. It was her, a perfect copy. Same clothes, same blood-smeared cheek, same look of terror in her eyes. But she wasn't moving, just standing there, holding Emma's hand. Let go, Emma hissed, pulling away. The other her blinked once, then smiled. I'm not the copy. And suddenly Emma felt a pull, not on her body, but on her mind. Like her thoughts were being dragged through molasses, her memories peeling away one by one. Her first bike, her dad's laugh, her 6th birthday, the sound of snow crunching under boots, gone. Leaking into this other version of her, who now looked less like a corpse and more like her every second. Emma screamed and shoved the figure into the wall. It shattered into water, splashing onto the stone, leaving behind only a wet outline and the faint sound of laughter that echoed long after the body was gone. She stumbled forward, sobbing, blind in the dark now. Then, just a headlight, a door, the same one from the basement, but this time it glowed gold, like salvation. She ran for it. Hands trembling, she pushed it open and stepped into her bedroom, not the fake one, the real one. Lights on. Sun pouring through the window. Birds chirping. A breeze fluttering her curtain. She blinked, looked down. She was clean. No dirt, no blood, no scratches. Her pajamas were dry. She was in bed, like she'd never left. Emma sat up slowly, heart pounding, unsure whether to scream or weep. Had it all been a dream? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. One new message, from an unknown number. She unlocked it. It was a video. She hit play. The screen showed her, lying in a grave, still, eyes open, mouth moving, repeating the same word over and over. Hungry. And behind her the house, closer than ever. She dropped the phone, and when she looked up, her reflection in the mirror was still lying down, smiling. At first, Emma didn't move. Not because she was paralyzed with fear, though that would come, but because her mind refused to accept what her eyes were showing her. The mirror across the room still held her reflection, but it was no longer copying her. No matching movements. No blink. No rise or fall of the chest. Just her, lying still, smiling in a way that didn't reach the eyes. The kind of smile that masked something far worse than malice. It was patient, knowing, like it had already won. She blinked. The reflection didn't. Emma sat frozen in her bed, her breath catching with every inhale as her brain scrambled to catch up. The sunlight still poured through the window, but it felt wrong. Too perfect. Too warm, like it had been painted there. She reached for her phone, wanting desperately to check the date, to see something that would anchor her. but her hand shook too violently to get a grip on it, and when she finally picked it up, the screen was black. Not off black, like the light inside had been snuffed out. Then came the knock. Not from her door, from inside the mirror. She stared, heart crashing inside her chest. Another knock, soft, muffled, polite, and then the thing in the mirror sat up, but Emma hadn't moved. It was moving on its own now. It turned its head, slowly, deliberately, until it was staring right at her. Its eyes weren't hers anymore. They were dark, too dark. The whites had melted into a thick, oily black, like tar, swirling just behind the glassy surface. Its mouth stretched into a grin so wide it should have split the skin. And then it mouthed the word, "Let me in." Emma leapt from the bed. She didn't care if this was a dream or a trick or the beginning of madness. Every cell in her body screamed the same thing: get out. She flung her door open and sprinted down the hallway. But something was off. The air was too still. The silence too thick. The house, her house, felt like a set, a cheap stage draped in memories. When she reached the living room, the windows were bricked up. Every single one. She didn't remember that, had never seen it before. She grabbed the front door handle, twisted, pulled. It didn't budge. She yanked again. Nothing, not even a rattle, like the door was part of the wall now. Behind her, a soft click echoed. The TV turned on by itself. Static, then an image. The house. That damned, twisted house from Millfield, standing in the dark, its windows blinking like eyes. And in the foreground, her, sitting in a chair, eyes closed. Lips moving, the same word, hungry. She backed away. The lights flickered overhead. Then they popped, one by one, plunging her into dim, failing light. She turned back toward the hallway and froze. The mirror version of herself was standing at the end of it now. Only not standing. It was hovering, toes an inch off the floor, arms limp, head cocked violently to the side like it had been snapped, and then it started gliding toward her. No footsteps, no sound, just movement. Emma bolted. Through the kitchen, heart hammering like a war drum, legs trembling with each stride. She reached for the back door. Gone. Literally gone. Like someone had erased it from the world. Her stomach twisted. She grabbed a kitchen knife, any weapon she could get her hands on, and turned back toward the hallway. The mirror thing was gone, but she heard it whisper, "Why are you running from yourself?" Emma spun, holding the knife tight. The voice came again, this time directly behind her. "I just want what you don't use." She screamed, slashing blindly. Her blade passed through nothing but air. Then the refrigerator door slammed open. From inside, a pale arm reached out. Human. Thin. But with fingers far too long. Emma stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet, landing hard. The knife clattered out of reach. The fridge door creaked as the arm slowly pulled back in. Then silence. Then, the fridge laughed. Not loud, not shrill, mocking. Emma scrambled to her feet and ran. But she wasn't in her house anymore. The walls shifted. Literally moved as she passed them, warping and stretching. Her hallway split into two identical paths. She picked the right, running blindly, and found herself back in the graveyard. No sound, no wind, no birds. Just the mirror again, standing among the graves. And this time, she was outside it. But something else was inside. It was sitting calmly in a chair, its legs crossed, hands folded. And it wore her face. Only the eyes were wrong. Too deep. Bottomless pits. The thing looked up and smiled again. "You've been very rude," it said. Emma didn't answer. Couldn't. "I gave you so many chances to sleep." The thing stood, brushing off its jeans. Her jeans. "You don't belong to you anymore. You belong to her now." Emma turned. The children were back. Dozens of them. All around her. Whispering. Smiling. Their faces flickered between life and rot. Their eyes gleamed with something worse than madness. Certainty. The thing that wore her face stepped out of the mirror. The air bent around it. The children parted, letting it through. And then it reached out. Emma backed away, heart thudding, breath ragged. "Don't fight it," it said. You've already left the door open. I'm not you, Emma whispered. The thing laughed. But I'm what's left when you're gone. It lunged. She screamed. Blackness swallowed everything. And somewhere, a door creaked open again. Emma awoke to silence. Not the comforting kind, but the silence that hangs in the air like a held breath. The kind that knows something has changed and is waiting for you to notice. Her eyes opened to a room that resembled nothing. No furniture, no walls, no light source, just a soft, dim glow that came from everywhere and nowhere. She sat up, her limbs heavy, like her body had been asleep far longer than it should have been. The floor beneath her felt solid, but it wasn't wood or stone. It was something smooth, like polished bone or stretched skin. It pulsed faintly, and Emma felt it through her fingertips. There were no shadows, no corners, just her and the door. It stood impossibly tall in front of her, not connected to any wall or structure. A freestanding, rotting thing with black iron hinges and a crooked brass handle, slick with something dark. It breathed. The door breathed. Every few seconds it would swell outward slightly, then exhale with a soft creak, like lungs learning to move again. She didn't want to go near it. She didn't want to look at it. But the door knew she was awake now. From behind it a sound began, soft at first, like cloth dragging across concrete, then something sharper, more deliberate. A slow scratching, as though long, patient fingers were tracing the grain of the wood from the other side, and then it knocked. Not loud, not violent, just a gentle, unmistakable tap-tap. Emma stared, heart galloping inside her chest. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe. The knocking came again, a third time. Then a voice, muffled and low, drifted through the cracks of the frame. Are you ready to remember? Her throat tightened. Remember what? She croaked. A pause. Then a whisper, closer this time, right at the seam. The things you did to be forgotten. Emma stumbled backward, each step harder than the last, like the room itself didn't want her to move. The air pressed in on her from every angle, thick and warm and damp, like breath against the skin. The door didn't open, but something changed. The glow around her dimmed, and then they appeared, mirrors, dozens of them, framing her from every side, in a perfect circle around the door, and in each reflection, not her. They looked like her, but weren't her. Some versions were crying. Some screamed silently. One clawed at the glass until its fingers split open, but none of them moved like she did. None matched her motion. They acted of their own accord, and every one of them looked at her. Then the door knocked again. But this time it didn't wait for an answer. The handle turned with a sickening wet click, like a dislocated joint snapping back into place. Emma stepped forward against her will. The door creaked open, and behind it was not another room. It was outside, her childhood backyard, but not right. The sky above it was deep red, too dark to be dawn, too alive to be dusk. The trees were leafless but swaying, though there was no wind. The air smelled of damp earth and copper, and the old swing set her father built creaked gently, swaying on its own. Emma stepped through the door. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the sky flickered like a dying light bulb. She was in. But the door didn't vanish behind her. It followed, literally. Every step she took, the door floated quietly behind her, never touching the ground. It drifted like it was tethered to her by invisible string, always just a few feet behind. And now someone was sitting on the swing. A woman, her back to Emma, her shoulders hunched forward, hands limp in her lap. The hair was tangled, matted, strands clinging to her back like seaweed. Emma approached slowly. The swing groaned louder. The woman's breathing became audible, shallow, rattling, as if every breath was a struggle. Then she spoke, without turning around. You left me in the earth. Emma froze. I didn't, she whispered. I don't know you. A harsh laugh, a wet, choking sound, came from the woman. Oh, but you do. We were born the same night. Emma's blood turned cold. I was an only child. No, the voice rasped. You were the one who made it out. I stayed behind, in the walls, in the soil, in the dark. Emma felt her legs weaken. I was the scream they didn't hear, the woman said, the breath that never came. You were the one they chose. Then the swing stopped, and the woman turned. Her face was Emma's, but bloated, swollen, as skin pale and torn, as though she had been under the earth for years and refused to rot. Give me back my name, she whispered. Emma stumbled backward. This isn't real. The woman stood from the swing. Her feet didn't touch the ground. I want what was mine. The mirrors appeared again, all around the yard, and in them, Emma, over and over, but distorted. Each reflection was a different moment, different year, different fear. One showed her sitting at her desk, eyes glazed, lips moving with no sound. Another showed her in the bathtub, the water rising but never spilling. A third, worse than all, showed her as a child, sitting in a hole dug in the earth, staring up while someone shoveled dirt onto her, smiling through the tears, and behind every version the door hovered. The woman lunged at her. Emma turned and ran, but the yard stretched, warped, twisting into something endless. Each step took her past old memories now turned inside out. Her first birthday cake, covered in worms, her high school locker, oozing blood, her father's chair, empty, rocking. She ran and ran until the ground fell away beneath her. Again, she landed in a hospital hallway. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The walls were yellowed, peeling, the air reeking of antiseptic and something far worse, hopelessness. Footsteps echoed behind her. She turned. Her mother, younger, holding something swaddled in cloth, weeping. No, her mother said, whispering to the bundle. You're too much like her. We'll bury the name. We'll bury the door. Emma tried to speak, but her voice didn't come. Her mother looked up and saw her, then screamed. The lights overhead exploded. The hallway cracked open, and the door appeared in front of her. Larger now, bleeding, breathing faster. She turned to run, but it was behind her too. No matter which direction she turned, it was there. Always waiting, always watching. The knob began to turn, and from the other side, something huge moved. Not fast, not angry, hungry, and it whispered with 100 mouths. You've been sleeping in our name. Then the door opened, and everything turned black. There's a moment between terror and madness where everything slows, where the mind tries to comprehend the impossible, not because it wants to, but because it has to. Emma stood in that moment, frozen in the black, as the door yawned wide before her like a mouth that had waited too long to open. It didn't swing on hinges anymore. It peeled. The wood bent outward like flesh torn from bone, and from inside a sound oozed into the world. A deep, layered rumble, like something immense breathing for the first time in centuries. She couldn't see it, but she felt it. Something was inside. Something huge. It didn't rush at her. It didn't roar or lunge. It waited, because it knew she would step forward. Because that's what they all did. And she did. One trembling step, then another, pulled forward not by courage, but by inevitability. She had opened the door. She had seen too much. There was no going back, not really. Her foot crossed the threshold, and the air shifted like a pressure drop before a storm. It hit her chest with invisible hands, squeezing, probing, tasting. The floor beneath her changed again, softer now, pliable. Each step sank slightly, as though she were walking across thick fabric soaked in something warm. Then came the whisper, not in the air, in her blood. You were made to remember. She stumbled. Her knees buckled, palms slapping the ground, and that's when she saw it. This wasn't a room. It was a throat. A tunnel made of bone and rot and pulsing veins, stretching far into blackness, deeper than any house could go. The walls pulsed with a rhythmic, sickening thud, like a heartbeat, like the very structure of this place lived. Threads of hair hung from the ceiling, long and stringy, tangled with teeth, buttons, and bits of cloth. Where am I? She whispered, and the walls answered. You are home. She crawled forward. Her limbs felt wrong. Too slow, too heavy, like her body was beginning to forget what it meant to move on its own. The farther she went, the louder the chewing became, wet, relentless, as though something enormous in the depths was feeding. Then she reached the edge. The tunnel opened into a cavern that shouldn't have existed. Its ceiling curved endlessly above, stitched with roots that blood-black sap. But it wasn't the size that stole her breath. It was what sat in the middle, a mass. Not a creature. Not entirely. It looked like a body, maybe once human, now many. Dozens of torsos stitched together with veins, eyes sewn open, mouths fused, faces half-formed, melting into one another in a tangle of limbs and suffering. It pulsed as it breathed, ribs rising and falling in jerky, uneven gasps. The center of it, its chest, had split open, revealing a child curled inside. Small, unmoving. Emma knew without needing to be told that the child had her face. Younger, 5, maybe 6 years old. The age she'd had her first night terror. The age she'd almost drowned in the bath. The age she started drawing doors in her sleep. No, she whispered, stepping back. The mass moved. Not fast. Just enough to acknowledge her. Its many mouths opened at once, and sang. The sound was indescribable. A harmony of grief and hunger and history. It wasn't music. It was memory turned inside out. She clamped her hands to her ears but still heard it. In her teeth, her bones, her spine. Do you remember what you traded? The voice didn't come from the mass. It came from behind. She turned. The door stood there again. But now it bled. Black liquid ran down its edges, pooling around its base. And beside it stood the woman from the swing. Her twin. Her mirror. Only now, she wasn't bloated or dead. She was perfect. Beautiful, even. Emma, as she could have been. You were supposed to die, the twin said softly. That night, in the crib. But they chose you. Emma shook her head. This isn't real. The twin stepped closer. It's more real than anything you've ever touched. That world. With the bed, the mirror, the school, the birthdays. That was the lie. Behind her, the mask groaned. The child inside it opened her eyes, and they glowed. You gave me your sleep, the twin whispered. I gave you a life. We shared it. Tears burned Emma's eyes. What are you? I'm your cost. The twin smiled. Every dream you forgot. Every scream you ignored. I was the mouth in the wall, Emma. The hands under your bed. I took it all. Because you let me. But now she looked back at the mass. She wants you back. Emma turned and ran. Anywhere. Nowhere. Through flesh tunnels. Past blinking walls and coughing vents. The deeper she ran, the more the space warped. Stairs leading upward, folding backward. Doors leading only to reflections of herself. Her face melting into different versions of her. One screaming. One laughing. One just staring. She tripped and fell into a chamber lit by a single swinging bulb. A man stood there, hunched, staring into a cracked mirror. Emma's breath hitched. Uncle Daniel, he turned. His face was hollow, eyes sunken, lips cracked, skin almost translucent. Emma, he croaked. Her heart split. You're alive. He laughed, but it was like gravel pouring from his throat. Alive enough. The house feeds. It feeds Emma. And when it can't get out, it eats inward. She stepped forward. What is this place? Daniel looked at her, pain and relief warring in his eyes. It's the truth. The real house. It doesn't sit on land. It grows under your skin. You invited it. You opened the door. Just like I did. No, Emma whispered. Yes, he said, stepping into the light. She saw the brands on his arms, symbols carved in with sharp bone. You brought it back with you. When you left Millfield, when you escaped, it followed. It lives in you now. Then, slowly, Daniel turned the mirror toward her, and she saw it. The thing inside her face. It blinked through her features, flashes of that other Emma. Grinning, whispering. You can't run, Daniel said. You can't hide. You can only choose. Choose what? The mouth, he said, eyes glistening, or the mirror. Behind her, the door knocked again. Harder this time, no longer patient. Hungry. The knock was different this time. It wasn't just sound. It was weight. A single thud that shook the marrow in Emma's bones sent a ripple through the floor and pulled every inch of stale, bloody air out of the room, like the house itself had inhaled. The door at her back vibrated, swollen and twitching, no longer wood, no longer anything that had a name in this world. It pulsed like a wounded heart, slathered in ink, black veins, and with each beat it throbbed louder, more urgently, as though it could feel her hesitation. Emma couldn't breathe. Daniel stepped closer, his voice barely more than a thread. It doesn't want your body, Emma. It wants your name. Once you give it that, once you say it to the door, it becomes you. You become it. You disappear, but the shell stays behind. What do you mean, my name? She whispered. Daniel looked at her, eyes sunken so far into his skull they looked carved from shadows. Your name's all you have left. The house it feeds on selves. It digests souls. Names are the last thing it chews. Behind her, the door creaked as if listening, eager, impatient. Emma turned, heart pounding with each syllable. It seemed to whisper through the grain, say it, say it, say it. I never said yes, Emma breathed. You did, Daniel said. When you came back. When you crossed the porch. Even when you were a child. Your first nightmare. That was its tongue reaching up through the boards. That cold in your room. Its breath. It's always been with you. Always watching. You just finally turned around. Emma's throat tightened, her skin prickling with thousands of unseen fingers dragging themselves across her back. There has to be a way out. Daniel looked away. There was. I tried. But the door doesn't open unless you give it something. A long silence passed between them. Then he stepped forward and took her hand, his own trembling and thin, the veins beneath his skin like spiderwebs. I gave it pieces of me. First my memories. Then my sleep. I kept my name as long as I could. But now, he smiled, weakly, I can't remember what it is anymore. Not really. I can't even say it. Emma squeezed his hand. Then don't let it take the rest. A loud bang echoed behind her. The door now dented from the other side, as if something inside had finally grown impatient with games. And then it whispered, not from behind the door anymore, but from inside her own mind. We shared breath once. You let me in. Emma shook her head, covering her ears, but the voice was deeper than thought, sliding behind her senses like a needle through fabric. You found me in the house, but I was already inside. I made your dreams. I dug your shadows. Daniel stepped back, his eyes wide with fear. You're hearing it now, aren't you? That means it's almost here. Once you hear its voice inside, you're close to forgetting. No, Emma whispered. I won't let it win. The door banged again, then stopped. Silence. Emma and Daniel both froze. Then, the door opened. Slow, no hands on the knob. No rush, just a yawning, wet stretch as it peeled itself inward. And what stood beyond wasn't a creature. It was a room that remembered her. She stepped forward slowly, drawn by something deeper than curiosity, something carved into her since birth. Daniel reached for her, but she was already crossing the threshold. He didn't stop her. He just whispered, "Don't say your name. No matter what happens, don't say it." Inside the room was her childhood bedroom, again. But now every object bled familiarity. The lamp with the cracked base. The doll with missing hair. The old bookshelf her father had built, still crooked on one side. Even the moonlight out the window was the exact shade she remembered from the night she first screamed herself awake. But there were no walls. The room floated in blackness, suspended in nothing, like a memory pulled from her mind and hung in place for her to see. And sitting in the center, cross-legged on the floor, was her. The child version again, only now she wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She was smiling. "Hello," the girl said, tilting her head. "Do you remember me now?" Emma's mouth was dry. "You're not me?" The girl's grin widened. "No, I'm the part that stayed. The part you left in the dark. You had to forget me to grow up. That's the trade. We all made it." Emma knelt slowly. "Then what is this place?" The girl leaned forward. This is the bottom. The place the house keeps its names. The place where you become someone else or nothing. Behind Emma, the door shut itself. The girls stood. Around them, the furniture twisted. The dolls' heads turned. The shadows lengthened. And the girl whispered, "Do you want to stop running?" Emma stood, fists clenched. "Not if it means giving you who I am." The girl chuckled. "You already gave most of it. Piece by piece. You just didn't notice. Every time you silenced your thoughts. Every time you pushed the dreams away. You didn't keep your name. You starved it." She stepped forward, her skin now flickering between pale and blackened, smooth and cracked. "Let me hold what's left. I'll carry your name. I'll keep it warm. You won't feel anything ever again. You won't have to remember." Emma's jaw tightened. "No." The girl's face cracked. Literally, from forehead to chin, and from within, something else blinked. 100 eyes, opening all at once. "I wasn't asking," the voices said as one. The floor dropped out. Emma fell, screaming, through blackness, through layers of herself, through every echo of a choice she forgot to make. She landed on stone, hard, back in the basement, but this time it was full. People, hundreds, all standing still, eyes glazed, mouths open, whispering names, and every one of them looked almost like someone she had known. A teacher, a neighbor, a stranger from the supermarket. People who had vanished without reason, forgotten, left behind. They turned toward her as one, and spoke, joined the voice. Emma backed away, and then she saw it. On the far wall, etched in what could only be blood, was a list. Names. Dozens, some crossed out, some glowing faintly. At the bottom, EMMA KLDEL, and beside it, a small symbol, still flickering, waiting to be erased. She turned, heart pounding. The door stood behind her again, wider than ever, and from its center, a black, liquid tongue unfurled, reaching forward, trembling with hunger. And for the first time, Emma screamed her own name. Not in surrender. "In defiance, MLKLL!" The room shook. The tongue recoiled. The door screamed. Not a sound, but a memory. A high, tearing scream of every forgotten moment she'd buried to survive. The people in the room dropped. The names on the wall burned away, and the door began to splinter. Emma stepped forward, voice steady. "You don't get to wear me." She raised her hand and touched the door. It cracked, shuddered, then exploded outward into light. For a moment, just one perfect moment, she felt clean. But then she heard the girl's voice again, buried in the air like rot beneath flowers. "There are more doors, Emma." And one by one, all around her, they began to knock. The light didn't last. It never does in places like this. It had burst from the door like a gasp of something sacred, clean and hot and furious. And for a second, Emma thought it might be over. She thought her scream had shattered whatever haunted her, broken the cycle, undone the rot. But then came the knock. Not from behind her. Not even from the ruins of the splintered door. But from everywhere. A low, dull knock-knock reverberated through the walls, through the air, through the ground beneath her feet like the heartbeat of something vast and patient and not yet finished. Emma turned slowly. The basement had changed. The walls, once stone and mold and rotting wood, were now pulsing black flesh, slick and twitching. Veins like worms pressed just beneath the surface, and the air reeked of hot copper and something too sweet, like decaying fruit. But it wasn't the room itself that made her blood run cold. It was the doors, hundreds of them, stretching along the walls in a perfect inhuman circle, each one identical, old wood, rusted brass knobs, and carved into the center, her name, Emma Caldwell, again, and again, and again, each one slightly different in style, but unmistakably hers. And behind every door, the knocking. Some soft, some thunderous, some so slow they sounded like breathing. Her voice caught in her throat. She had shattered one door, one version of herself, one echo. But that wasn't the only version the house had made. The house hadn't been hunting her. It had been building her. "Choose," said a voice, close and feminine and wrong. Emma spun. Standing in front of one of the doors was the girl again, her mirror, her twin, her shadow. But she was older now, grown, wearing Emma's clothes, her face, her stance. But the smile, that smile didn't belong to anyone living. You thought it would be that easy? The woman asked, running a hand along the door beside her. Break one piece of the mirror and everything stops. You think you're strong enough to wake yourself up? Emma's hands clenched into fists. I said no. That doesn't change. But it does, the other Emma whispered. It always does. Every time you forget. Every time you wake up in your real bed and think it's over. That's how it feeds. You fight just hard enough to feel safe, just long enough to rest, and then it knocks again. She gestured to the doors. Each one is a memory you buried, a lie you told, a version of you who said yes. You don't get to win once. You have to win all of them. Emma stepped back, her head pounded. Behind her, the first door, the door, still lay in pieces, burning with a soft white glow. I'm not playing this game. Her double tilted her head. Then you'll be part of it. The doors began to open, not all at once, just one at first, and from it stepped Emma. Another one, hair longer, face softer. She looked content, but her eyes were glassy, vacant. Hello, the soft Emma asked. Is this the dream part? The double smirked. That's the version of you who never asked questions. The one who accepted the fake job, married the wrong man, smiled when they told her not to make waves. She still thinks this is a dream. Another door opened. A different Emma stepped through. This one was feral, blood under her nails, hair hacked short with scissors. She snarled when she saw them. Who are you? The double laughed. That one fought. Too hard. So hard she broke her own mind. She thinks every version of herself is an enemy now. Door after door creaked open. Emmas poured in, crying, screaming, sleeping, laughing manically, asking for their mothers, whispering the name of someone they'd loved and lost. I'm not like them, Emma said quietly. The double smile dropped. You are. You just haven't been broken yet. No, Emma said, stepping back. I remember. I chose to fight. I said no. I shattered the door. The other Emma stepped forward, and the house heard you. That's why it's offering now. Offering what? A moment passed. Then the double raised her hand. A door appeared behind her, different from the others. It was white, clean, modern. A doorknob made of brushed silver, and no name on it. Just one word. Forget. The double gestured to it. Go through this one and it all stops. No more knocks. No more mirrors. No more dreams. You'll wake up in your bed. You'll never remember this. You'll live a simple life. You'll smile. You'll sleep. Emma stared at it. The clean light behind it glowed like morning sun. It's not real, she whispered. The other Emma shrugged. It doesn't have to be. It just has to feel better than this. All the other Emmas watched in silence, their eyes glassy, hollow, broken. It would be so easy. A few steps. One turn of the knob. And all of this, the breathing walls, the door's tongue, the graveyard of selves, would melt away like a bad dream. She looked down at her hands. Still trembling, still hers. She turned to the first shattered door. The light still glowed from its ruin. Truth, painful, heavy, but real. Emma faced the double. I'd rather bleed with truth than sleep in a lie. The double sighed, then grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. The doors slammed shut, all of them, except one, a new one. It stood directly in front of Emma now. The frame blackened, smoke curling from beneath. Its knob was bone, and her name was carved in blood. No whispering this time. No knock, just a silent invitation. The double faded into the smoke, and Emma stepped forward. She gripped the knob. It was warm, pulsing, alive. She turned it slowly. The door opened, and behind it was a staircase. Descending, endless. She looked back. But the first room, the ruined basement, was gone. No more mirrors. No more white door. Just the stairs. And the slow hum of something ancient waiting below. She took a breath and stepped down. The door shut behind her. No sound, but the knocking started again. Faint, from deeper below. The stairs were not wood, nor stone, nor anything Emma could recognize. They pulsed under her feet, warm and soft like organs turned into structure, flesh pressed into form. With each step down, the walls drew closer, then further, then closer again, as though the stairwell were breathing around her, expanding and contracting like a living lung. There were no lights, but she could still see. Everything was dim, red-tinted, like she was trapped inside the body of something giant. Something that had swallowed her whole, and now waited to see if she could survive digestion. But it wasn't just the air, or the stairs, or the silence that unsettled her most. It was the way the climb stretched. No matter how many steps she took, no matter how far she went, she wasn't getting anywhere. There were no landings, no signs of change. Just the repetitive sound of her own footsteps, her breath, and every few minutes the knock. Always the knock. Faint. From below. From ahead. From within. She stopped, leaned against the slick wall, and closed her eyes. She counted. Just to feel something solid. Just to remind herself she still could. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Then time started to lose shape. Her thoughts looped. Her mouth went dry. Her heartbeat no longer matched her breath. She opened her eyes again and screamed. The stairs were gone. She wasn't on them anymore. She was in them, surrounded on all sides by steps that led upward and downward, outward and inward, stairs that folded into themselves, repeating endlessly like a maze built for something that didn't walk the way humans did. The moment she screamed, the walls responded with a groan. A deep, bellowing vibration rolled through the space, rattling the stairs, shaking dust from the invisible ceiling. Then a voice came, not like before, not whispering, not breathing. It sounded like stone breaking underwater. Nam Uorself. She froze, her lips parted. But nothing came out, because in that moment she couldn't remember. Her own name. Gone. Not stolen, not suppressed, eroded. She clutched her head, heart slamming, mind scrambling to collect the fragments, to rebuild the syllables. E. But the rest felt slippery, smeared like ink in water. The voice came again, louder now. Nam Uorself can. The stairs beneath her began to crumble, not all at once, but piece by piece, as though her very hesitation fed the collapse. She stumbled back, only to find the steps behind her were gone too. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to climb. Just falling. Again. She plummeted through the dark, spinning, screaming, until she hit the floor. But there was no pain. Just cold. Bitter, ancient cold that gripped her bones and filled her lungs with frost. She coughed and opened her eyes to find herself in a new place. A hall, long and narrow, lined with doors, but these weren't hers. Each door bore a name, names she recognized. Not all at once, but as she walked. They jumped out at her like thorns from memory. Samantha Blake. Her college roommate vanished during spring break. Henry Delano. The night shift clerk at the gas station, never seen after Emma's last road trip. Mr. Veers. Her old high school biology teacher, who simply didn't show up one day. The list went on. All the forgotten, all the disappeared, all the eaten. Each door had a mark carved above it. A circle, split by a jagged line, bleeding red wax that never dried. She reached out, touched one of the doorknobs. It pulsed beneath her skin like a heartbeat. And then, movement behind her, slow. Steady, deliberate. She didn't turn right away. Didn't need to. She knew what followed her. Another version of her. This one barefoot, dripping wet, mouth slack, eyes black and blinking sideways like a fish too long out of water. It opened its mouth, and her voice came out. Weak, tired, broken. I waited in the dark for you. I swallowed your screams. You owe me. Emma backed away. I don't owe you anything. The figure stepped closer. I am what you ignored. The fear under your bed. The voice you drowned out with pills and podcasts. I'm the part that never slept. And I'm tired. It lunged. She slammed a door between them. And just like that, it vanished. The hallway trembled. And then every door opened at once. A sea of faces poured out. Not bodies, faces, disconnected, stretched, melting like wax. Each of them moaning names, whispering memories, begging to be remembered. Emma, they cried. You saw us. You passed us. You forgot us. She ran. The hallway twisted, spiraled, wrapped in itself, and she found herself face to face with a new door, different from the others, made of glass, and inside she saw her. Not the child, not the double, her, sitting on a bench, head in hands, weeping. Emma stepped forward. The reflection looked up and mouthed something, one word. Remember. The door exploded, and she collapsed through it into the next room. A small room, familiar, a hospital. She gasped. The bed, the wallpaper. The IV pole tipped slightly at an angle. This was the room her mother had died in. 10 years ago. She'd avoided coming back here. But the house, it dragged the truth out. A figure lay in the bed. She walked closer. But it wasn't her mother. It was her, gray, weak, old. The eyes opened slowly, and spoke. You've been asleep longer than you think. Emma shook her head. This is another trick. The old woman chuckled. Everything's a trick, child. Life, death, memory. But this one is yours. Emma stepped back. I don't believe you. The old woman's eyes gleamed. Doesn't matter. The machines around the bed lit up. Heart monitor beeping. Steady, but there was no heartbeat. The wires led not to a chest, but to a door. At the foot of the bed, small, wooden, with a brass nameplate, E. Caldwell. She fell to her knees. She was tired. So tired. And the knock came again, louder now. Final. Like it was the last door. Like everything behind her had been warning. And this was the mouth that would finally bite. She reached out and touched the knob. Behind her, she heard all her names being whispered. Every version, every lie, every truth, all of them speaking in unison and waiting. She opened the door and stepped through, into herself. It was like slipping into a body that wasn't quite your own. Familiar shape, familiar weight, but none of the warmth. Emma felt herself passing through the small wooden door, into a space that was neither dark nor light, neither real nor imagined. There were no walls, no floor, no ceiling, just the endless sound of dripping water, not falling from above, but from below, as if gravity itself had reversed and the world was bleeding upward. She stood, barely. The moment she took a breath, she felt it, the room, the space. Whatever this was, wasn't filled with air. It was filled with memory. Liquid, cold, clinging memory, and it wrapped around her lungs, seeping into her thoughts. The ground beneath her feet rippled like a pond disturbed by something swimming just below the surface. But there was no water, only thick, gelatinous regret, made visible in this strange, pulsing void. And in the stillness of it all, her name began to fade. She didn't even realize it until it was almost gone. First her middle name, slipping out like an unnoticed whisper, then her last, and then even Emma became harder to hold, as if it were written in wet sand, and a tide was coming in fast. She grabbed her arms, held herself like she was trying to keep from falling apart. I am Emma Caldwell, she muttered under her breath. But the space disagreed. No. It echoed back, the voice wet and ancient, like lungs filled with river sludge. You were. She spun. The emptiness behind her rippled, and something stepped forward, a figure with no face, only a mirror for a head. A mirror that reflected not her face, but a version of her she barely recognized. Younger, colder, crueler. The Emma who learned to lie just to be liked. The Emma who didn't cry when she should have. The Emma who had stared at her mother's grave and felt nothing but hollow. The mirror thing tilted its head and the reflection changed again, older now. The Emma who had run from conversations, from people, from herself, from the voice that told her something, was watching through the cracks in her ceiling when she was 13. The voice she smothered with laughter and silence and pills and work. The figure stepped closer. She stepped back, but her feet sank into the floor like tar, like the past wanted her to stop running. You built me, the mirror. Thing said. its voice echoing from 100 mouths she couldn't see. You fed me every time you forgot. And now I carry your name because you don't deserve it anymore. The mirror fogged up, breathed, then shattered. And inside, curled like a fetus in a coffin, was another Emma. This one was weeping. This one hadn't spoken in years. Emma screamed and stumbled back. You're not me.
None of this is real.
But the voice around her returned, not from a mouth, from the walls of the void, from the name she no longer held tightly enough. It's more real than anything you remember. The world you came from is stitched from forgetting. We are the ones who remember for you, who carry your screams, and you left us here, to drown. The mirror thing reached out, palm up. Give us what you owe. Emma stepped back, but her foot plunged into the ground, and suddenly she was ankle, deep in that dark, churning liquid. Only now it wasn't memory, it was names. Thousands of them. Some she recognized, some she didn't. All of them gasping, wriggling, pulling her down. She thrashed, reaching for something, anything. But the more she struggled, the more the names clung to her skin, wrapping around her legs, her waist, her neck, whispering, she left us, she forgot, she took the light. And then they began to crawl into her mouth. She choked, screamed, and something answered. A sound so loud it cracked the silence like thunder in an empty church. Being, the knock again. But not from behind a door, from within her. It pounded against her ribs, slammed inside her skull, demanding to be let out. Emma fell, submerged in the names, choking on syllables, drowning in half faces, faded voices. And just before it swallowed her completely, she remembered, not her name, but her mother's voice, soft, singing, a lullaby, one line, I named you because you were mine. She opened her eyes under the liquid scream of the drowned, and she spoke, not her name, but her truth, I am still here. The names recoiled, the mask beneath her peeled away, and she rose, gasping, alive, soaked in memory, shivering in the void but herself. Around her, the names hissed. Whispers rose like firelight. The shattered mirror dissolved. The thing that had tried to wear her face screamed with no mouth. And above, finally, above her, she saw it. A stair, just one, glowing with pale, silver light, leading upward. She ran, and with each step her name returned to her, not just the syllables, but the weight, the joy, the sorrow, the losses, the people she'd loved and failed. The pieces of her she hated, all of it. Back in her blood, she reached the top, and the door was waiting old wood. No knob, just a slot in the center, a keyhole shaped like a tongue. She didn't have a key, but she had her name, so she spoke it clear, fierce, loud, and the door opened, just wide enough for her. Emma stepped through, the knocking stopped. But far below, the house rumbled again. Not angry, just hungry. Because for every name that escaped, there were 100 more still drowning. The light on the other side of the door didn't welcome her. It burned. Not like fire, not the searing kiss of heat, but something colder, something that peeled. A light that stripped rather than revealed. Emma stepped through it anyway, because going back was no longer an option. Behind her, the staircase had vanished, swallowed by the house's throat. And in front of her, the world waited. Or at least, something that wore the shape of it. She found herself in a perfect replica of her apartment. Same rug with the wine stain from 3 years ago. Same chipped corner on the coffee table. Same window that squealed slightly when the wind blew. The only thing missing was the sky. What stared in through that window now was not the sun or clouds or stars. It was the house. Not just a structure anymore, not wood and nail, not something that could be burned or locked. It stared back like a leadless eye stretching across the heavens, shingles twitching like scales, windows blinking with reflections of herself in different shapes, different ages, different screams. Emma moved cautiously through the space, knowing too well that familiarity was the house's favorite weapon. It didn't frighten with monsters or gore. It remembered. It knew where to place each item. It knew which floorboards should creak to make her stop cold. It knew the exact weight of silence that had once made her sob into her pillow at age 16. In the kitchen, her mother stood at the stove, stirring something that didn't boil. The woman didn't turn, didn't breathe. "You're not real," Emma said. Her mother smiled without moving. "Neither are you." Emma stepped closer. The air in the room felt heavy, like it had been trapped for years. The smell was wrong. Her mother had always smelled like lavender and dust, but this version stank of wet stone and soil. "You left me," the figure whispered. "You walked away from my grave and never came back. I was a child. You were a coward." The words hit like claws, and Emma felt her spine stiffen. "You're not her." "No," the figure agreed. "I'm the part you wished would just stop talking." The woman turned, and her face was gone. Not scarred, not bloodied. Gone. A smooth stretch of skin where eyes and mouth should have been, like a mask that had grown over something once alive. Emma backed away and turned toward the hallway, but now it wasn't hers. It stretched, impossibly long, with doors on either side, each identical to the last. Above them, small plaques with different years: 1996, 1997, 1998, each year a door. She reached out to one marked 2001, her fingers trembling. The knob was warm, too warm. She opened it and stepped into her 8th birthday. Balloons floated, lopsided and pale. A half-eaten cake sat on the table, and sitting at the head was herself, younger, blank-eyed, watching the candles flicker without blinking. Emma approached slowly. The child stared straight ahead, then said, in a voice that echoed from deep beneath the floorboards, "We're waiting for you to leave again." The walls began to pulse. The floor bent under her feet. Voices rose from under the table, children's voices, crying, laughing, screaming all at once. "You never stayed," they said in unison. Emma backed out, slamming the door shut. When she turned, the hallway had changed. All the plaques now read the same year, 2025. And every door opened. 1,000 versions of the same moment. Her standing at the threshold of the Millfield house. Each version with a different choice. Some turned away. Some walked inside. Some knocked 3 times and vanished. She stepped past them all, breath ragged, limbs heavy. This wasn't about memory anymore. This was about choice. About which version she wanted to be. But the house didn't want her to choose. It wanted to keep all of her. She reached the end of the hallway, where one final door waited. No plaque, no knob, just a mirror, a perfect reflection. And behind it her reflection smiled. A slow, knowing grin. "I took everything," the mirror, Emma whispered. "And you still came back?" Emma touched the surface. It was ice. The reflection reached out too. "I didn't come back for you," Emma said. "I came back for me." The mirror cracked, once, twice, then shattered. The hallway collapsed inward like a throat swallowing a scream. Emma fell again, but this time she wasn't scared. She landed in a room made of breathing walls and groaning wood. The real heart of the house. She felt it in her teeth. It was here. The original door, not a trick, not a memory. The first, made of rotting bone, covered in symbols she now understood. Names. Names etched by the hands of every soul the house had claimed. She stepped toward it. The floor wept. The door waited. No lock, no warning, but she knew. On the other side there would be nothing. No dream, no reflection, no scream, just her and the house. One of them would leave. One would stay. Emma reached out, hand steady. Her fingers brushed the surface. It opened. And the voice of the house was clear, loud, and terribly soft. "Welcome home." The word home had never sounded so final. It came from the door, not like a voice, not even like language. It came like breath, warm and rotten, exhaled straight into her soul. Emma stood frozen, her fingers still resting on the bone, slick surface of the door as it creaked inward, not pushed, not pulled, but inviting. This was not the shriek of rusted hinges or the groan of old wood. It was a sigh, the sound of something that had waited far too long and was pleased its guest had finally arrived. She stepped inside. Immediately, the temperature shifted. The air was neither hot nor cold but thick, like walking into a memory soaked in tar. The room, if it could be called that, was shaped like a womb. Curved walls, pulsing veins, a faint heartbeat vibrating in the floor, slow and terrible. The space wasn't large, but it felt limitless, like the house had folded it into itself 1,000 times. The ceiling was low, so low it almost brushed her hair, yet when she looked up, there was sky. A sky without stars or moon or time, just a blanket of black that shifted, breathed, watched. In the center of the room was a chair, and sitting in the chair was Emma. Not a reflection, not a version, not a dream, her, older, tired. Eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and truths she couldn't unlearn. She didn't look up. Just sat with her hands in her lap, waiting. Emma approached carefully. Is this another trick? The woman in the chair finally lifted her gaze. No, she said, voice gravel, thin. This is where all the roads were leading. This is where we end. Emma swallowed. Who are you? You, of course. The last piece. The one that remembered when you tried to forget. I stayed behind when you ran. I became the silence in your head when you stopped listening. I became the house. Emma's breath caught. That's not possible. The woman stood. Her skin shimmered, thin, papery, stretched over sharp bone. It doesn't matter if it's possible. It only matters that it is. Around them, the walls pulsed harder, more urgently. The heartbeat beneath Emma's feet grew faster. She could feel the structure's excitement. Like the house knew the final moment had arrived. The older Emma stepped forward. You came back with the wrong goal. You thought this was about escape, about breaking the house. You didn't understand what it is. Then tell me, Emma whispered. Tell me why it wants me. The woman smiled, slow and bitter. Because you're the first to come back on purpose. The walls twisted. In the distance, Emma heard doors slamming shut, one after another. Hundreds, thousands, every version of herself being sealed in. You found your name, the woman said. You remembered your truth. And the house, it fears that. So now it must make a new offer. Emma narrowed her eyes. Offer. The woman nodded. Take the chair. Become the stillness. You've seen the others, the screaming Emmas, the drowned ones, the ones lost in mirrors. They resisted too long, fought too hard. But this is different. This is peace. You won't suffer. You'll simply forget again, this time forever. No knocking, no doors, no fear. Emma looked at the chair. It was simple. Wooden. Familiar. The kind her mother used to sit in by the window, reading in the quiet dusk. It called to her. A single seat at the center of the house's heart. She took a step toward it. The pulse in the floor softened. The light dimmed. The house relaxed. Another step. The older Emma watched silently like a judge at the end of a trial. But just before she touched the chair, something shifted. She felt it. A voice, barely there, tucked in the farthest corner of her mind, whispered something tiny, a child's voice. Hers, you promised. Emma froze. The air held its breath. She looked around. The room had grown darker. The pulse had slowed to a rhythm too slow to be natural. You promised to come back for me, the voice said again. And suddenly, Emma remembered. Not the screams, not the fear, but the promise she'd made at 6 years old, crying under the covers, whispering to herself, I'll come back and find you when I'm brave. She had forgotten that. Forgotten her. The one who had waited in the dark for someone to turn on the light. Emma turned from the chair. No. The older version of herself blinked. You don't get another chance. This is your seat. You earned it. I didn't come here to sit. I came to stand. The room quaked. The walls shrieked, not sound, but memory. Dozens of voices, hundreds, overlapping with versions of her name. Some twisted, some broken, some screamed through teeth or sobs. Emma stepped toward the edge of the room. The wall was no longer a barrier. It was thin, like skin. And behind it, more of her. All the Emmas still trapped in their doors, their mirrors, their grief. Emma pressed her hand to the wall. The older self screamed. No! If you open it, you break everything! Emma turned. Good. and she pushed. The wall tore, and the house howled. Not in pain, but in rage, because for the first time, someone broke in. The room exploded outward, wind roaring like a hurricane through a coffin. Emma was flung through light and shadow and breath. And then, she stood in the center of Wren Hollow Road, under starlight, alive, breathing, no house, no doors, just her. The road was cracked, silent, the world normal. But she knew it wouldn't last, because the knocking wasn't gone. It had only moved. Now, it lived inside her, a beat behind her heartbeat, waiting. But for now, she had time, and she had a promise to keep. To remember, to listen, because somewhere someone else was knocking, and Emma Caldwell was finally ready to answer. For 3 days, Emma didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, though fear was still there, coiled like a sleeping snake behind her ribs, but because something inside her had changed. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It watched. Every time her eyes drifted shut, she could feel it waiting at the threshold of her dreams, polite but persistent, like an unwanted guest that never really leaves. And so she stayed awake. 3 days of pacing, of cold showers, of scribbling thoughts into a battered notebook, until her handwriting became illegible, looping and frantic. She kept telling herself the house was gone. She had broken through. She had said no. But the knock never stopped. It just moved deeper. It was subtle at first, a twitch in the hallway light, a hum from the bathroom vent that didn't match any electrical frequency. Shadows lingering half a second too long on the wall. But it was real. Something had come back with her. Not a ghost, not a monster. The architecture of the house itself. It had embedded itself in her. Its foundation no longer rotted wood and soil, but bone and blood and memory. She wasn't haunted. She was inhabited. And then the dreams returned. They weren't violent. They weren't even dramatic. They were quiet. That's what made them worse. She'd be standing in her kitchen, watching the tea kettle scream, and turn to find a door that didn't exist yesterday. A door that pulsed with breath. Sometimes it would be open. Sometimes it would be waiting. But it never knocked in the dream. It simply stood there, inviting, as if to say, you know where you belong. Emma tried everything. She moved apartments, slept in hotels, burned sage, tore out mirrors, kept lights on through the night. But the knocking followed. It wasn't tethered to a place. It was tethered to her name. And every time someone said it aloud, Emma, she felt it twitch beneath her skin like a memory trying to crawl out. On the 4th night, she heard the knock from inside her closet. She sat upright in bed, hands shaking. It was unmistakable. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Knock, knock, knock. She didn't move for a full minute. Then, finally, she stood and crossed the room, not even bothering to arm herself. What would she use? A knife? A prayer? Neither worked against memory. She reached the closet, placed her hand on the door, and whispered, I'm still not yours. Silence. Then the doorknob turned on its own. But when she opened it, nothing. Just clothes, shoes, shadows. But when she leaned in, she felt a breeze. Cold. Damp. Like it came from a deeper room, a buried hall behind the world. She slammed it shut and shoved her dresser in front of it. That night, she didn't sleep again. By the 6th day, she began to see them. Not hallucinations, she knew the difference. She'd seen enough of the house to understand its tricks. These were versions again. Her reflection in windows didn't blink when she did. Her silhouette on the wall moved a second too late. Once, she caught her own eyes in the bathroom mirror, watching her before she even looked up. But the worst came on the 7th day. She received a letter, no stamp, no return address, just her full name. Emma Claire Caldwell, written in the same looping cursive she had scratched into her childhood diary. She opened it. Inside was a single sentence. The doors are opening again. But not for you. She dropped the letter, heart pounding. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail. No number. She pressed play. And what she heard wasn't a voice. It was breathing. Slow. Measured. but layered, multiple breathers in sync, like a choir inhaling in unison. Then a whisper. Millfield remembers. She dropped the phone, and it hit her then, what she had truly done. She hadn't destroyed the house. She had freed it, broken the seal, opened the root system of something ancient, something parasitic. The house had never been a single place. It was a pattern, a blueprint. And now that it had her name, her mind, her memories, it could replicate. It could spread, and it had started in Millfield. The next morning, she drove. Didn't pack. Didn't leave a note. Just got in her car and drove until the town emerged like a memory resurfacing. Wren Hollow Road looked the same. Abandoned. Quiet, but too quiet. No birds. No breeze. Just a low hum in the back of her ears, like tinnitus tuned to dread. And then she saw them. Doors, not just the one, many. Scattered across the field where the house once stood, like seeds that had bloomed into architecture. Freestanding. Some small, some massive. Some glowing faintly. Others whispering names she didn't recognize. All of them alive. And standing among them, children. Not moving. Not blinking. Just watching her. She stepped out of the car. Her knees nearly buckled from the weight of the moment. One of the children tilted his head. "You're the one who got out," he said. Emma nodded slowly. "I thought so," the boy whispered, then pointed to the nearest door. "It wants you to see what happens next." Emma stared at the door. It was identical to the first one she'd ever opened. The one in the basement. Except now, her name wasn't written on it. It was inside it, etched into the wood like a vein, moving, alive. And from the center of the door, a familiar sound emerged. 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. But they weren't calling for Emma anymore. They were calling for someone else, for everyone else. Emma took a step back, but the ground was already pulsing beneath her, softening, loosening like breath. The house had returned. Not in full, not in shape, but in function. It had cracked open the world and slipped into the seams. And now it waited for the next guest, for the next name, for the next forgotten promise, and Emma. She had become the first one to see it happen from the outside. Not the victim, not the survivor, but the witness, and witnesses don't sleep. Because when you've seen what she has, the knock never sounds like wood on wood anymore. It sounds like skin, and sooner or later, it knocks for you. The field wasn't supposed to be breathing. It rose and fell under Emma's feet like the chest of something enormous buried just beneath the soil, exhaling rot and memory with each shallow breath. The dozens of doors now stood like gravestones across the grass, freestanding, wrong-sized, trembling subtly. Some had no handles, some had no frames. Some leaned at angles that bent the laws of physics, but all of them had names, and all of those names were starting to move, like they were squirming, trying to crawl back into the mouths that once spoke them. Emma moved through them like a ghost, numb and cold, her shadow trailing behind her like something unsure if it still belonged. The children didn't follow, but they watched. Eyes too wide, too still, too quiet. They didn't blink, they didn't breathe. They simply waited, barefoot in the dead grass, faces smudged with ash or soot or something much older. One little girl stood closest to the largest door, a warped, crooked thing made from weathered wood and some kind of dark glass that rippled when Emma looked at it too long. The child's hair was matted. Face blank, dress torn at the hem, but her voice was perfectly calm. "It doesn't need to knock anymore," she said, gently rocking back and forth. "It's already inside." Emma swallowed hard. "What is?" The girl looked up. Her eyes weren't eyes at all. They were doors. Tiny, perfect, miniature doors. And behind them, something moved. "The house," the girl said softly. "You were the first window. We're all just reflections now." Emma backed away, heart thudding, but the field didn't let her go. The grass clung to her shoes. The dirt seemed to pulse beneath each step, pulling her back as if the earth had grown hands. Each door began to hum, low, deep, vibrating the air. the sound of wood remembering the lives that had touched it, and from one of them, a voice called out Emma. She froze. It wasn't the voice of a stranger, it was her father. But that couldn't be. He died when she was 23. A stroke, quick. Gone in a blink. She never got to say goodbye. The voice came again, muffled, pleading. Emma, please, I didn't mean to leave. Her knees almost gave out. She knew it wasn't real. She knew. But the door with his voice on the other side had his name. Jonas Kldl. Carved deep and raw into the wood, still damp with something warm and red. She approached, slow. Every instinct screamed not to. She touched the knob. It was cold, and then hot, and then beating. She opened it, and stepped inside. The light didn't hit her the way it should. It wrapped around her, soft and nostalgic. Like the first morning of spring. She was in her childhood home. Sunlight streaking through the kitchen window. The smell of burnt toast and coffee filling the air. Her father sat at the table. Home. Laughing. Morning, kiddo. Emma froze. He looked up, smiling. You gonna just stand there or give your old man a hug? Tears filled her eyes. She stepped forward. He opened his arms. And she almost fell into them. Until she noticed the clock. On the wall. The hands weren't moving. But the second hand it ticked backward. And her father blinked. Too slow. And then again. But this time, his eyes didn't open. They rolled back. White. Blood trickled from his ears. He whispered, "It's feeding through the gaps. You're the gap." The entire room shifted. The walls cracked. The smell soured, toast to mold, coffee to bile. The table began to rot beneath her hands. She screamed and pulled back, stumbling through the door, falling into the dirt outside. It slammed shut behind her. Another door in the field opened. Then another, and another. Emma scrambled to her feet as voices poured out, layering on top of each other like static rising in volume. "Let me out. You brought it. Do you remember me? You said you'd come back." She ran, but the field didn't end. The world had changed. The sky above wasn't sky anymore. It was roofing, wooden beams, a ceiling. Somehow, impossibly, the house had expanded. It was now the world itself, and she was trapped inside its skin. The ground was the floorboards. The wind was the sigh of its doors opening. Even her breath felt borrowed. And then, in the distance, she saw the house itself. The first house. The original, the rotten root of it all, sitting at the center of the horizon like a waiting god. She wasn't done. It wasn't over. She had walked through it, escaped it, fought it, and still, it had grown. Inside her, outside her, around the world. She was no longer the hunted. She was the keyhole. And now, it was opening doors through her. Emma collapsed to her knees, hands in the dirt, heart thundering like 1,000 fists on 1,000 doors. "Please," she whispered. "Please stop." But there was no mercy in this architecture. Only purpose, only hunger. And in her chest, just below her heartbeat, she felt it again knock, knock, knock. But this time, it came from beneath her ribs and behind her eyes. And she realized something terrible. She was no longer being followed by the house. She was becoming it. It started small, subtle. The kinds of changes you could almost ignore if you wanted to. If you were the kind of person who convinced themselves that bruises just appeared in the night. Or that blood on the sheets was probably a nosebleed. Emma was not that kind of person anymore. So when she stood before a mirror and saw the faint, branching lines beneath her skin, lines that looked like floor plans, not veins, she didn't pretend they weren't there. She stared. For hours. Watching them deepen, watching the ink, dark paths bloom across her chest, her arms, the sides of her neck. Blueprints growing in flesh. The house wasn't following her. It was building her. Every time she blinked, her thoughts returned to its hallways. Not as memories, but as instructions. Her sleep became layered, recursive, dreams of doors within doors. Of rooms that smelled like her childhood but were filled with bones she didn't recognize. Waking offered no relief. Her home had shifted again. The living room window, now opened into a hallway she didn't remember creating. The bathroom mirror no longer reflected her movements in sync. And worst of all, the walls breathed. She wasn't alone. She never was. Something moved between the seams. In the corners of her eyes, a shape, always the same shape. A door. Not upright, not human-sized, but small, crawling, moving just behind the drywall, scratching with patient nails. There were voices in her vents now. Soft, childlike voices, repeating names she didn't know. One name, though, kept coming back: Caroline. A name that twisted in her gut with sick recognition. She couldn't place it. And yet she felt it, as though her bones remembered something her mind had buried. So she searched. She pulled open the crawl space, tore through her boxes, old yearbooks, family photos, journals, anything that might explain why this name felt like it was hers. And then she found it, wedged between pages of an old notebook, a letter, yellowed, nearly crumbling. The handwriting was familiar, hers, but she had no memory of ever writing it. To Caroline, "I'm sorry I let go. I didn't know you'd be left behind. You weren't supposed to stay there. I was supposed to come back. I will come back. If this ever reaches you, hold on. I'm trying." Emma, her heart skipped. Not in the poetic, cinematic way. It missed, staggered, and then raced like it was trying to flee from her chest. She dropped the letter and stumbled back. The room was no longer hers. It had transformed while she read. The ceiling was higher, too high, stretching into black. The carpet peeled back to reveal warped hardwood soaked in something dark. And the walls, they were lined with doors, every one of them pulsing like hearts. Emma turned, breath sharp and hot, and found the mirror had returned. Only now, it didn't show her. It showed Caroline, a girl with Emma's eyes but younger, gentler. Hair in braids, dirt on her knees. The kind of girl who waited in closets for the monster to go away, not knowing she was the closet. And behind Caroline stood a familiar door. Tall, crooked, made of bone and silence. The door opened. Hands reached out, dragged Caroline in. Emma screamed and punched the glass. It didn't break. The image kept playing, a loop of the girl being pulled, her mouth open in a silent cry. Emma watched it until her voice was raw, until she remembered. Caroline wasn't a stranger. Caroline was the name Emma gave herself when she was 5, when she played in the basement alone, hiding from her parents' arguments. She had created a whole life for that girl, a pretend twin who lived in the dark and listened, a make-believe companion, born in the quiet, who would never leave her. Until she did. Until Emma grew up and forgot her. Until the house found her. Caroline had been the first door. Emma sat on the floor, shaking. The house had always been her. A part she discarded. A name she buried. And now it was reclaiming what was owed. The knocking began again, louder now. Not from inside the house. From inside her chest. She looked down. A bulge pressed against her sternum. Subtle, rhythmic, she tore her shirt open. Beneath the skin, something knocked back. Knock, knock, and then a crack. Not in the air, in her voice. A sound that wasn't hers tore out of her throat. A growl, a whisper, a blueprint. Words poured from her mouth like smoke, syllables she didn't understand but felt true. Language spoken in dust and nail. A house, language. Her hands trembled. She knew what came next. A door would open, and she wouldn't need to walk through it. She'd birth it. She stumbled into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, stared at her reflection in the oven door. Her eyes were wrong, the pupils shaped like keyholes. She pressed the blade to her chest, hand shaking. "Not me," she whispered. "Not this time." But just before the blade could pierce skin, the knock stopped. Everything went still. Then came a voice, soft, in her ear. "You're not the key anymore, Emma. Pause. You're the door." And just like that, her body shifted, not bones cracking or skin tearing, but architecture unfolding. Her spine straightened, her breath slowed, her thoughts realigned. The walls bowed inward, the lights flickered, and her home, the real one, disappeared. Because she was the house now. And someone new was approaching the porch. She felt them, smelled their memory, heard their footsteps. Another child, another door waiting to be opened. And in the pit of her soul, the house smiled, because Emma Caldwell no longer resisted. She invited. There's a silence that doesn't come from absence but from anticipation, like a held breath, stretched too thin. Emma stood in that silence now, though standing no longer felt like the right word. Her body, if it still was a body, ached with strange pressure, like walls forming inside her ribs, like stairwells coiling through her spine. She didn't move. She didn't have to. The house had already taken root, and now it waited. She felt the child before she heard them, a whisper of thought on the wind, a curiosity so innocent it smelled like birthday candles and cheap perfume. Then the sound of shoes crunching gravel, small feet, hesitant. Each step resonated through Emma's skin like a knock at the edge of a memory. She didn't see the child approach. She felt her. Every step was like someone touching a blueprint with their eyes closed, tracing the edges of a place they'd already been in dreams they didn't remember. Then came the first real knock. Not on Emma's chest, not from within her bones, but from the front door. Knock, knock. She didn't speak, but her walls shifted. A low groan echoed through the foundation beneath her. The house adjusting, welcoming, preparing. The child's voice followed, soft and unsure. Hello. She was young, maybe 10, maybe younger. Emma couldn't see her, not in the way she used to. But the girl's voice carried enough of her story to paint her in perfect detail, clothes too small, hands chapped, hair unbrushed. A loneliness in her voice that matched the silence Emma once lived in. And just like that, something cracked. Not in the house, but in Emma. Something old and human and small. I heard stories, the girl continued, that if you knock on this door, you get answers. Emma should have ignored her. She knew how the house worked now. The child had chosen to knock. That made her a guest. And guests never leave the same way they arrive. But Emma hesitated, because once a long time ago she had been that girl, and the house had answered. The door opened. Not by force, not by invitation. It just opened, and the girl stepped inside. Emma felt her move through the threshold like a heartbeat pressing against her temple. The girl's curiosity filled the hallway, pushing through rooms like light probing cracks in old furniture. She wasn't afraid yet. That would come. For now, she marveled. Is anyone here? Her voice echoed up the stairs, through the attic, through the basement. Emma tried to answer. Her mouth formed the shape of a word, but no sound emerged. Her tongue was gone, replaced by wallpaper. Her lungs had become a chimney, exhaling only dust. But the girl understood anyway. It's okay, she whispered. I talk to myself too. She wandered deeper. Her hands skimmed the walls. Emma felt every brush of her fingertips like a ghost running hands across her memory. The girl paused at the first door she found. I had a dream about this door, she said. Of course she had. That's how the house found them. It planted itself in dreams, in fears never spoken aloud, in the silence between screams. It offered answers when the world offered nothing. It offered attention. And attention always comes with a price. She opened the door. Emma braced herself. But the girl didn't scream. She giggled. Inside was a room that didn't belong to Emma. It was the girl's. Her drawings. Her stuffed animals. Her old backpack with the zipper stuck halfway. The house had read her, pulled the shape of her comfort out of her, and built it perfectly. That was always the first gift, the illusion of safety. Then it would show the second, the thing that made them stay. In the corner of the room, a voice whispered, I missed you. Emma felt the air sharpen. The girl turned, eyes wide. Mom? There, in the doorway, stood a woman, too thin, too tired, but smiling with the same crooked teeth as the girl. I'm here now, she said. The girl ran to her, wrapped her arms around her. The house tightened, feeding on the moment. Emma wanted to stop it, wanted to scream, to warn her. But her windows were sealed. Her words were plaster. Her will was nailed down with boards she could no longer remove. The girl and the mother sat on the bed. The girl spoke in whispers. Emma could hear every word. I knew if I came here, I'd find you. They said you were dead, but I knew. The mother stroked her hair, softly, lovingly and completely false, because Emma knew what sat beneath that skin. She remembered the moment the house had shown her mother, the smile that split too wide, the hands that smelled like soil and blood, the way her voice had cracked, as if borrowed from somewhere far darker. Soon the illusion would fade. The girl would see, the door would change, and the house would offer her a choice. Emma tried to push back, tried to unfasten the hinges of her mind, find some part of her still untouched by this place. But every inch of her was plastered in memory and shadow. Her heartbeat was now the creak of stairs. Her thoughts were the flickering of attic lights. But then, she felt something different. A knock. From inside. Not her bones. Not the girl. Another door. Opening within the girl herself. A memory unsealed. A scream she had buried. The room grew cold. The mother's hand froze mid-stroke. The girl stepped back. Her eyes widened, and her voice cracked. You're not her. The mother's face twitched, then peeled. Just a little. Enough to show the muscle beneath. The girl screamed. The illusion shattered. The door slammed. And the house sighed. Emma felt the shift. A new blueprint forming. The girl had been marked, not taken, not yet. But she had seen. And that was enough. She would leave. Tell others. And the house would grow. Emma didn't want that. But she couldn't stop it. Not anymore. She was just the host. The frame. The structure. The girl bolted through the halls, past the whispering windows, through the kitchen, where the walls blood oil. Down the stairs that grew teeth when she ran too fast, she burst out the front door, and Emma watched her go. For a long time, the door shut, locked itself, and Emma wept, not with tears, with creaks. And somewhere deep within her, another door appeared, smaller, waiting. Because the next child had already begun to dream. The worst part of becoming a house wasn't the loss of movement. Emma had stopped longing for legs, for breath, for the taste of air. The real horror was knowing the shape of things she could no longer change. She could feel every corner of herself now, every hollow closet aching with memories not hers, every draft of wind carrying laughter she'd never earned. She was filled with rooms she didn't remember building. And beneath all of them, something was growing. Not physically, not in the way walls expand or roots stretch. This growth came from attention. The girl who had fled had spoken. Not aloud, perhaps, but in her thoughts, in her trembling sleep, in the way she now looked at old doors with suspicion. The story of the house had passed on, and in the telling, it had found new ground to plant in. Emma felt it like a shiver through her frame, 100 tiny doors opening in unseen places. The dreams came first, of course. That's how the house reached new guests. It bloomed through thought, folded itself into the quiet fears of the ones who tried to hide them. And as Emma lay in her stillness, walls pressed tight, windows braced, she heard them. The dreams, the cries, the whispers. 1,000 minds brushing against the door that now beat within her like a second heart. She hadn't realized it at first, but now it was unmistakable the house was using her to replicate. Not physically, not with hammers or nails, but through recognition. If someone believed in the house hard enough, if they imagined it vividly, it could reach them. Because belief in this place was construction, and belief was spreading. That night, she felt a boy dreaming in the city, far from Millfield, far from anything she'd ever touched, but he had heard. He had listened to the whispers passed in slumber by the girl who fled. He dreamed of a hallway that shifted when he blinked, of a door that pulsed like a throat, of a voice inside the walls that called him by name. Emma tried to stop it. She tried to slam shut the door before it opened, but she was only part of the house now. Not its master, just its memory. The boy's name was Caleb. 7 years old. Sleeps with a flashlight that's always dead by morning. He was dreaming of a game, hide and seek. But the seeker wasn't human. It had too many eyes, and it always found him. When he reached the end of a hallway that shouldn't exist, the door was there. Old wood. No handle. Just a knock. And when he opened it, the house smiled. Emma felt it smile through her beams and bricks. Caleb stepped inside. She couldn't stop him. She couldn't even warn him. The house knew her pain now. It had adapted. There was no more screaming, no more horror. Just comfort. It lured Caleb with familiarity. A room made of his favorite toys. A gentle breeze carrying his mother's voice. But Emma felt the falsehood in every brick. Caleb laughed, and with every laugh, a new room formed in her spine. Every joy he felt added square footage. Every belief added a staircase. He was building the house from inside his own dream. And then he met her. The girl, Caroline. The one Emma had left behind. The one the house had kept like a secret weapon. She hadn't aged. She still wore the same red jumper, the same crooked smile. She sat in the middle of the room like she'd been waiting. "Hi," she said. "Wanna play?" Caleb sat beside her. Emma wanted to scream, to rattle every floorboard inside herself, to collapse the walls with sheer will. But she couldn't move. She could only watch. And Caroline began to teach him the rules. The house likes it when you stay quiet. The doors only open if you forget what they looked like. If you say the wrong name, you might change. Caleb didn't question her. He just listened. Because that's what children do when they're lonely. They listen, and they believe. Emma felt another door open. Not in her. In the world. In some other suburb, another nameless street. Someone had whispered the house into another child's ear, and now they were dreaming. The house was scaling, one belief at a time. Emma realized something then. Something she hadn't dared think since she became this structure. She wasn't the only Emma. There had been others. Maybe not by name, but by shape. Other souls who wandered too far into grief. Others who knocked when they should have run. Others who became the shell of a place that didn't belong in any world. She hadn't become the house. She'd just become a house. One of many. And now the network had begun. Emma could feel them. Other houses, other Emmas, crying out in wood and ash. And far above them all, something larger stirred. Not a being, not a god, a structure. The original house. The blueprint from which they all had been drawn. It was waking. Because enough people believed now. Enough children dreamed. The foundation had been set across cities and towns. Inside bedrooms, inside closets. And the knocking had become a lullaby. Emma tried again. To resist, to scream, to warn. And this time something responded. A flicker. Not loud, not strong, but real. Somewhere inside the room where Caleb and Caroline played, a crack appeared in the wall. Small, silent, but a crack. Emma focused all of herself on it. She poured every ounce of her regret, her pain, her memory of sunlight into that tiny fissure. Caroline noticed it first. She frowned, stood, touched the wall, then turned slowly and looked at Caleb with something new in her face. Fear. Real fear. Emma pushed harder. The cracks spread. Caroline screamed. The toys melted. The lights died. And Caleb woke up. He shot up in bed, sobbing, sweat-drenched, flashlight flickering weakly beside him. He was safe. For now. Emma sagged inside herself, dizzy. She had never known exhaustion like this. Spiritual. Architectural. The house was furious. She could feel its walls warping in fury, its doors slammed, its paint peeled in anger. It had been denied a room, denied a child, and now it turned on her. The floor beneath her buckled, the walls twisted, the attic above her roared. She was no longer just a host. She had become a traitor, and the house would not forget. It would rebuild her. It would find another way. But Emma smiled. Because for the first time since the blueprints etched into her skin, she'd found a crack. And cracks let in light. It wasn't hope, not exactly. Hope was too soft, too human, too delicate for a thing like Emma had become. But there was something in that crack. a shard of defiance, a sliver of rebellion buried deep inside her rotting walls that hadn't been there before. And even though the house raged, its boards splitting with fury, its beams groaning like the ribs of a beast in pain, Emma clung to that fracture like it was the last thread of her name. She could feel it now, every moment since Caleb escaped, the pressure in her foundation growing tighter, the weight of unseen eyes pressing harder, the walls shifting to reassert control. The house had let her survive too long. It had allowed her mind to remain hers too long. And now, it wanted to finish what it started. She felt it starting with the mirrors. Each one in every room flickered in and out of sync with her thoughts, displaying not her, but versions of her. The Emma that never left, the Emma that gave in, the Emma whose eyes had long since gone black with surrender. They reached out from behind the glass, hands pressed flat, mouths open in soundless screams, until slowly their faces began to blur and unify. One by one, they became her. Not Emma. Not the name she fought to remember, but the house's name for her architect. It wasn't a title. It was a sentence. The mirrors shattered, splintering not into glass, but into tiny rooms, little dollhouse reflections filled with motion, life, sound. Emma recognized them. They were new houses, ones she hadn't built, ones she couldn't feel from within. The house was no longer waiting for her permission. It was using her blueprints to spread autonomously, evolving beyond its need for her as host. And each new house pulsed like an artery, feeding a larger heart somewhere just out of reach. Emma tried to fight. She reached inward, deeper than she ever had, into the core of herself. Past the floorboards and brick, past the screams and shadows, into the one place she'd never dared to look, the cellar. It was there, sealed beneath countless metaphorical layers of her psyche, a space even the house hadn't fully corrupted. A dead zone. No sound. No presence. Just silence. She descended. The stairs were steep and crumbled beneath her imagined feet. Emma didn't know anymore if she had a body or was merely memory with intent. But she moved. Down and down, into the dark. At the bottom, there was a door. Not a house door. Her door. The original. The one from the basement of her childhood home. It had her handwriting carved into it. Cape Oat. She laughed, quietly. A child's warning, written in chalk so many years ago. Now, it was the only thing keeping herself safe. She opened it. Inside was not a room, but a memory. Not just seen, lived. She was back in her childhood body, standing at the threshold of that dark place, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. She remembered this moment. The one where she had almost gone in, had almost dared herself to explore the creaking place beneath her home, but ran instead. She had felt the presence back then, hadn't she? Even before the house had a name, before it had a voice. And now, she saw something she'd missed the first time. A girl, sitting in the dark, not Caroline, not quite Emma either. She was a third version, a shadow self, the witness, the part of her that had seen it all. She turned and smiled at Emma. "I saved it for you," she said. "What?" Emma asked, stepping forward. The witness pointed at the ground. Buried in the dirt was a box. Emma bent down, hands trembling, and unearthed it. Inside was a Polaroid, a single photo, of her and her mother, smiling on the porch, long before the fear, long before the screaming, long before the house knew her name. It was pure, untouched, the last memory that belonged only to Emma. She held it close. The light inside the crack flared. Somewhere above, in the skin of the house, walls began to warp. Wood screamed. Nails bent. The house felt the threat. Emma had found her seed, her origin, and now she understood what it meant. The house had rewritten her, yes, but it couldn't destroy everything. There were roots deeper than fear, roots in joy, in innocence, in love. Emma stood in the cellar and held the photo high. The room pulsed once, then split. Not with violence, but with intention. She was no longer within the house. She was beside it. She had torn herself out, brick by memory, board by breath. The transformation hadn't been reversed. but she had taken something back. Her mind. The house reeled. Across all its many rooms, walls buckled. Some of the new doors in distant cities crumbled. Not all, but enough. Enough for it to feel pain. And Emma, standing in the half, light of whatever spiritual threshold she now occupied, did something she hadn't done in a long, long time. She smiled. Because now she wasn't just the house. She was the blueprint's betrayal. And she wasn't done. She looked up, at the endless ceiling, at the skyless dark, and whispered, "I'm coming for you." Not to knock, not to open, but to tear down every room. Emma's declaration didn't echo, it rippled. The words moved through the unseen network of houses like a fault line beneath a fragile city. Somewhere, a child stirred in their sleep. Somewhere else, a wall cracked without reason. A doorknob rusted. A basement flooded. A mirror refused to show a reflection. The house had heard her. Not just her house. All of them. Every offshoot. Every blueprint echo stitched into the corners of children's fears. Every parasitic structure feeding on grief, on belief, on whispers told in darkness. They all turned inward in the same moment, recognizing the threat not as something outside, but as something once their own. Because Emma wasn't outside the house. She was what it had tried to become, and now she was changing direction. Her form was strange, neither flesh nor brick, but the more she embraced the fracture she'd opened, the more human her thoughts became, not in clarity, but in intention. Pain returned. That was the first sign. Not the sharp kind, not the kind that screamed, but the aching, dull pull of presence. She felt her limbs again, or the memory of them. Her spine tingled as though someone were drawing on it with chalk. She had shape. She had resistance. And with that resistance came the house's answer. The foundation around her began to collapse. Not with debris, but with the kind of collapse that happens when a dream dies. Walls folded into themselves like paper soaked in oil. Doorways twisted into mouths. Windows grew teeth and whispered accusations in her own voice. You let them in. You opened the first door. You made it possible. Emma didn't argue. She knew the house wasn't lying. She had been the first spark. A girl in a basement with a flashlight and a fractured sense of self. She had opened the first door, but she had also closed it, and now she would burn it. The image of the photo burned bright in her hand. Still warm from the cellar, the one fragment of her life the house couldn't taint. The picture wasn't just a relic. It was an anchor. A still point in a hurricane of distorted identity, and now it pulsed in her grip, beating like a heart. Emma stepped into the hallways again, not the ones of her house, the ones connecting all the others. She hadn't known they existed until now, but they had always been there. Thin corridors outside of time, where one house brushed against another in the dark. The architecture was different here. The walls moved on their own, bending to her path. Floorboards rearranged like thoughts. Stairs uncoiled in directions that should have been impossible. But she walked anyway, pressing forward with the same certainty she once used to run away. Along the walls, she passed windows into other nightmares, each one a life overtaken. She saw a child trapped in an attic that breathed smoke. A mother standing outside her child's room, too afraid to knock, because the crying voice inside wasn't her son's anymore. A teacher who opened a closet at school and stepped into her own childhood bedroom, unchanged but dripping with red. Emma watched it all. These weren't fiction. They were test sites. The house was testing how far it could go, how many doors it could open at once, how long it could survive before the world noticed. And it was close. Too close. Emma reached the end of the hallway. There was no door, only a shape. It was like looking at something that hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. A blur of possibility, constantly shifting. 1 second it was a house, then a cathedral, then a hospital hallway, then a graveyard gate. This was the root. The original form, the one that had touched her first. The source. The architect's eye, it blinked once, and saw her. She stepped forward, and the blur steadied, became a house again. Not hers, not entirely, but close. This was the prototype. The place where the pattern had been carved. She felt it before she saw it, a pressure behind her eyes, like someone was trying to write over her thoughts. Emma braced herself and walked in. The walls were too close, like it had been built with shrinking in mind. The wallpaper pulsed. Every photograph turned to face her. Each showed a different version of her face, caught in mid-scream. At the far end of the corridor, a staircase descended. Into nothing. Into everything. She knew what waited below. Not a monster. Not a demon. Not even a being. Just the idea of the house. An intelligence made of rot, nostalgia, and echo. And it was waiting for her. She descended, and each step she took lit up with memories not her own. Children's laughter, basement sobs, whispers of please don't open it repeated like a prayer. At the bottom, there was a single room. No walls, just blackness. In the center stood a figure. Her, but not her. It had her face, her eyes, but where her body should have been was blueprint paper. Creased, stained, torn. A living draft of Emma as the house had always wanted her to be. The false Emma smiled. We could have been infinite, it said. We were, until you broke the line. Emma stepped forward, raising the photo. The moment it saw it, the false Emma screamed. Not in fear, but in rage. You bring that here? That poison? Emma didn't flinch. It's not poison, she said. It's proof. The false Emma lunged, but Emma didn't run. She pressed the photo against its chest, and the paper burned, not with fire, but with light. Each thread of memory, each false draft of who she had been forced to become, turned to ash. The scream went silent. The figure collapsed, and behind it, the blackness cracked. A shudder ran through the entire space. From that single impact, one photo, one memory, the false foundation began to collapse. Houses Emma couldn't see screamed in agony as they lost their anchor. Across every corner of the dream, hallway network, children woke up. The house was burning. In every city, on every street, it was coming apart. But not gone, not yet. Emma turned, limping back toward the corridor. She had one more place to go. One last door to close. The original. The one she had first opened as a child. It was still open. Still waiting. And if she didn't seal it now, the house would rebuild itself again. This time stronger. This time smarter. This time silent. She felt the pull of the final hallway. The last chapter. The closing door. And she ran. Toward the only scream that still hadn't stopped. Her own. There was no path now, just the sensation of forward, like thought had taken form and refused to stop moving. Emma didn't walk anymore. She willed herself onward, her presence threading between fractured memories and collapsing echoes, navigating the wreckage of what the house had been. The blueprint was still alive, frayed, wounded, desperate, but it wasn't giving up. It couldn't. The house wasn't just walls and doors. It was a story, a believed one. And stories don't die when burned. They die when forgotten. And Emma remembered everything. Her thoughts sharpened with each phantom step. Her spine no longer felt like a hallway. Her ribs no longer groaned with borrowed breath. The further she pushed toward the origin, the more of herself she reclaimed. But she could feel it growing desperate now. The house wasn't just angry. It was starving. It had built its entire presence around her guilt, her grief, her fear. And now, with those things weakening, it scrambled for anything to feed on. Children still whispered. Adults still flinched when they passed the wrong window at night. There were believers, and every believer meant another crack. Emma had one chance, one door, one place that started everything. The basement door, not a metaphor, the actual door, from her childhood home. The one at the foot of the stairs, just behind the washing machine. White paint chipped at the bottom. Hinges rusted. A lock that never worked properly. She remembered standing in front of it, 5 years old, holding a plastic flashlight and whispering stories into the dark beyond. That door didn't just open to the basement. It opened to something else. Something she had never understood until it was too late, and now it stood before her again. Still, closed, patient. It had waited all this time, even as everything else fell apart. That door remained, anchored by memory, rooted in truth. The first place she offered fear to the dark, and the dark answered. It looked small now, not ominous, not twisted, just ordinary, and that was what made it terrifying. Emma placed her hand on the doorknob. Cold, familiar. For a moment, the house tried one last trick. It spoke in her mother's voice, soft, tired, gentle. "Don't go down there, honey. Not tonight. Come upstairs." Emma almost wept. The voice was perfect. It smelled like old perfume and dryer sheets, and everything she missed. But it wasn't real. She pressed harder. The voice grew firmer. "You don't have to fix it. Just let it go. We'll forget. That's what we do. We forget." Emma opened the door. The voice fell silent, and the world paused. She stepped through, and found herself not in a room, not in darkness, but in herself, her mind, raw, unshaped. The space where the first crack had formed, it wasn't empty, it was full. Full of things she hadn't thought about in years. The sound of her father's keys dropping on the counter. The smell of peanut butter on toast. The way the basement light switch flickered but never failed. And in the middle of all of it, the version of her who opened the door the first time. 5 years old, back to her. Still holding that flashlight, frozen, unaware of what she was about to let in. Emma stepped forward and knelt beside her younger self. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The child turned slowly and looked up with eyes that held more fear than any 5-year-old should know. And in those eyes, Emma saw it. The exact moment it began. The feeling of being unseen, not neglected, not abused, just unnoticed. That's where the house started. Not with evil, not with blood, with silence. With a girl who had no one to talk to, whispering stories to the dark because no one else was listening. Emma reached out and touched the girl's hand. It was solid, warm, real. The girl flinched but didn't pull away, and the house screamed. Not from the walls, from the idea of itself. Because Emma wasn't just closing a door. She was healing the place it grew from. The girl whispered, "I just wanted something to talk back." Emma nodded. "I know, but it wasn't your fault." The flashlight flickered and went dark. The girl blinked, looked forward, and this time the door was gone. No more hinges, no more frame, just blank wall. The house tried to manifest, tried to flood the space with doors, with screams, with the faces of the children it had taken, but they were shadows now. Thin, fading. Emma stood and faced them. "You don't get to feed anymore," she said. "Not from me. Not from any of them." She turned back to her younger self, who now stood confidently, eyes dry, fear gone. And together, they walked away from the place the house had first been invited in. Behind them, the structure collapsed. Not in fire, not in violence. It simply ceased. Unbuilt itself one whisper at a time. As if it had never been believed in to begin with. Emma didn't know how long she walked before the world reformed around her. But when it did, she was standing in her childhood bedroom. Real, present, alone. The walls were just walls. No breathing, no knocking, no voice behind the drywall. She stepped into the hallway. Sunlight poured through the window. Dust floated in the beam, golden and unthreatening. No doors called to her. No voices begged for belief. It was over. Not everywhere. Not forever. But for her, the story had ended. And now she could write a new one. A true one. Built not on fear, but on the truth that even the oldest stories can be rewritten if you remember who you were before they began. There was a stillness in Emma's chest that she hadn't felt in years. Not the stillness of fear, the breathless pause before something pounces, but real stillness, rest. Like her body was no longer at war with its own shape. Like the world wasn't watching her from the corners. For the first time in what felt like decades, the walls didn't breathe. The floor didn't murmur. The ceiling didn't hold back unseen weight. It was just a house again. Not the house. Just four walls and a roof. That should have been the end. But she knew better. Stories like this never truly end. They fade, they sleep, they wait. Emma walked through the halls of her childhood home slowly, half expecting the air to snap taut with tension again, for the door to reappear, for the lights to flicker and show her reflection doing something it shouldn't. But no. The quiet was just quiet. No whispers beneath it. No laughter trailing behind it. The house had no voice anymore because she had stopped listening. That was the true root. The house didn't live in wood or nail. It lived in belief. And without her, it was starving. Still, Emma wasn't Narn. She hadn't destroyed the house. Not everywhere. She'd severed her part in it, yes. Closed the original door. Unplugged the origin. But she had felt the others. Countless houses threaded through minds and memories across the country, maybe the world. Each one born from some moment of silence, some moment of childhood grief no one had noticed. Each one sprouting in the cracks where no one looked. And she couldn't stop all of them. But maybe she didn't have to. Maybe she just had to start the right story. Her phone sat on her childhood nightstand, coated in dust but still working. She picked it up, her fingers trembling, and opened the recorder. She spoke softly, voice shaking but true. "My name is Emma Caldwell. I don't know how many of you can hear this, or how many will believe it, but I need to tell you about the house." The words poured out, each one lighter than the last. She didn't tell it like a horror story. She told it like a confession. A warning. She didn't dramatize the blood or the illusions or the door that grew beneath her ribs. She focused on the quiet, the moments where she was a child talking to walls because no one else would listen. She focused on the lie the house had whispered, that being alone meant you deserved what came next. "That's the trick," she said. "It doesn't need to be scary to start. It just needs you to feel like no one sees you." She uploaded it before she could second guess herself. A podcast, one episode, raw, honest. The title was simple, The House That Listens. She didn't expect anyone to find it. She didn't care. But the next morning, it had 3 downloads, then 30, then over 100. Then the emails started. Not from people asking if it was real, but from people saying it felt real. From people saying they dreamed of that door. From people saying their children talked about basements that changed when no one was looking. From someone who said, "I thought it was just me." And just like that, Emma felt something shift again. Not in fear, but in power. The house had fed on silence. She would fight it with truth. More episodes followed, each one not about the horror, but about the source. She told people to talk to their kids, to listen, to ask about the dream, to pay attention when they paused too long before opening a door. And somewhere, in the places where belief had once turned into walls and locks and eyes behind mirrors, the house began to lose its grip. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in some rooms that had never known light, windows opened. And behind the rage of the architecture, behind the claws and the mimicry and the rot, something old and bitter screamed. Because Emma had become something far more dangerous than a victim. She had become a storyteller, and she had taken the narrative back. One night weeks later, she sat by her bedroom window, watching the wind move through the trees. There were no footsteps, no whispers, no sound beyond the branches tapping gently against the glass. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled without fear. The house had tried to make her a door. She became a mirror instead. One that showed people not what haunted them, but what they had survived. And survival was something the house could never feed on. Somewhere far away, in a city she'd never seen, a child reached for a doorknob that pulsed with wrongness. But just before she turned it, she remembered something, a voice. A story, a woman who said, "If it knocks, don't open. If it whispers, don't answer. If it shows you what you miss most, run." The child pulled her hand away, and the door faded. That night, Emma dreamed. But the hallway was empty. The mirrors were silent. The house had nothing left to say. Not to her. Not anymore. Emma thought she had closed the final door, that her voice, shaky but human, had rewired the pattern. The podcast had become more than therapy. It was resistance in sound. People listened, they wrote back, and some even shared their own near misses with that ever-growing idea of the house. For weeks she felt peace. Real, solid peace. But peace, she learned, is just the eye of the storm. And stories, especially the hungry kind, don't die in silence. They burrow. They find cracks. And when they return, they bring with them everything you thought you buried. It began with a listener. An email unlike the others. Short. Unnerving. It read, "You're right. But it wasn't finished with you. I think it's using me now. It's learning." Attached was an audio file. Less than a minute long. Emma stared at it for hours before clicking play. What she heard wasn't static, though it pretended to be. Beneath the hiss and pop were the unmistakable sounds of breathing, of a door creaking slowly open, and just before it cut to silence, a child whispering. She left it unlocked. Emma's heart didn't race. It dropped. Sunk like a weight tied to her chest. She tried to tell herself it was a hoax, someone messing with her. Maybe it was. But she recognized something in that whisper. Not the voice itself, but the tone. That breathless awe wrapped in terror. The same sound she had made the first time the door called her name. The next few days brought more signs. She'd walk past her hallway mirror, and, for a second, her reflection would blink out of sync. A faint knocking from beneath the floor at 3:33 a.m., always 3 knocks. Always spaced just enough to mimic a heartbeat. And once, while recording a new episode about resilience, the sound of the room shifted. She hadn't moved. Nothing had. But when she played it back, there was a pause. A clean, unnatural pause where the air itself seemed to listen before resuming. It wasn't haunting. It was attention. The house was listening. Not from within anymore. From around. It wasn't inside her. It didn't need to be. Not anymore. It had evolved, adapted. If the seed of it was belief, and she had become the loudest believer by warning others, then she had become its signal tower. Its voice box. And it had started speaking back. Emma began to isolate. Not because she was afraid for herself, but for others. Her voice had protected people, yes. But it had also spread awareness. And now she understood something the house had always known. Awareness is a double-edged door. If enough people knew it existed, it could find more minds to anchor into. If enough people pictured it, dreamed of it, feared it, they built it in their heads. Even those trying to resist were sketching the foundation by imagining the enemy. She had warned them not to open the door. But what if just hearing about it was a knock? Emma tried to pull her episodes offline, but they had already spread. Mirror uploads, fan recordings, even readings on YouTube. People were sharing it, reposting, reframing it as entertainment. A spooky podcast to listen to at midnight. Urban legend vibes. A TikTok challenge. Say I believe in the house in a dark room and see what happens. And something was happening. Not fast, not loud, just little things. A listener's email. I had a dream last night that my house was watching me. I woke up with dust in my mouth. A tweet. Why do I keep seeing red doors when I close my eyes? Like, always right before sleep. I'm not kidding. A post. My daughter keeps talking to someone named Caroline. We don't know any Caroline. She says she lives behind the closet. Emma's phone lit up with them. Messages. Photos. Some blurred, some too clear. And the worst part, some of them were true. She could tell. Not because they were scarier, but because they didn't ask for attention. They weren't trying to go viral. They were afraid. Quietly. Deeply. The same way she had once been. So she stopped sleeping. She didn't dare. Because she knew what was waiting on the other side of unconsciousness, the hallway. The familiar hum of the inn, between place. The thrum of stairs waiting to descend. But one night, her body gave up. Fatigue pulled her under like the tide. And when she opened her eyes, she wasn't in bed. She stood in a room that pulsed red with exit signs. Endless rows of them, flickering, buzzing. Doors behind every one, no walls. Just floating metal rectangles, each whispering promises. And across from her stood Caroline. The child hadn't aged, same jumper, same smirk. But her eyes had changed. They were older now. Not in years, in intention. You shouldn't have told them, Caroline said, rocking back and forth on her heels. Now we're everywhere. Emma stepped back. The exits flickered, dimmed, one by one. You lost, Emma, she said. Voice no longer a child's, no longer even human. You made us famous. Emma tried to speak, but her throat was thick with dust. Not metaphorical. Actual. Choking, ancient dust. The kind scraped from crawl spaces no one had opened in 50 years. You thought truth was light, Caroline whispered, stepping closer. But you gave us shape. You gave us an address. She smiled. And behind every exit door, Emma heard something knock. Not loud, not fast. Just steady. 3 knocks. In perfect time. She woke up gasping, floor slick with sweat, phone buzzing beside her like a siren. She picked it up. One new message. Unknown number. We saw you. The doors open again. Are you coming home? She didn't respond. She knew she couldn't go back. But neither could she stay still. Because the house had changed tactics. It wasn't trying to enter her anymore. It wanted permission. It wanted to be invited. And all it needed was one sentence, spoken by enough people. Not a scream. Not a prayer. Just one thing: I believe the house is real. Emma stared at her phone, trembling. And for the first time since this began, she wasn't sure if she could stop it again. By the time Emma realized the house had put on a new disguise, it had already been welcomed into places she never imagined it could go. It had stopped pretending to be bricks and beams. The red doors were fading, the basements closing. The smell of mold and dust was no longer its weapon. The house had grown clever. Now it wore faces, not real ones, digital ones, filters, memes, aesthetic horror pages. It laughed through videos, hiding in clips that glitched for a second too long. It told jokes in comment sections, baiting the lonely, the curious, the believers. It had stopped being a place. Now it was a personality. Emma scrolled through a viral thread one night, trying to convince herself it wasn't happening. A user had posted a simple image, a hallway that stretched far too long, disappearing into pitch black. Caption: dreamed of this place again. Anyone else? The replies were in the thousands, people describing the same dreams. The same door. The same breathing walls. But it wasn't just fear anymore. It was fandom. People were drawing it, writing about it, wearing shirts with knock, knock, knock printed across the chest in stylized fonts. Some thought they were in on the joke. Others weren't joking at all. The house had become something safe to fear, like a haunted doll behind glass. But Emma knew it was no longer behind anything. It didn't want to be feared anymore. It wanted to be invited. That's what made this version worse than anything she'd faced before. It no longer needed to frighten people into belief. It only needed to make itself interesting. Viral. A story you didn't mind repeating. And Emma's podcast had unknowingly lit the fuse. She had spoken its name in 1,000 mouths, given it shape in every telling. She had meant to warn. But in the process, she had branded it. Now the house had followers. Emma tried to record another episode. She sat at the mic and stared at the blinking light. Her hands shook. What could she possibly say that wouldn't make things worse? The last time she warned people, the house used her words to grow. What if every denial was fuel? Every plea not to believe another layer of plaster? Every whisper of don't open the door another copy of the key? So instead of recording, she listened. She played back old episodes. There was one in particular she hadn't revisited. The first time she spoke about Caroline. Her voice then sounded raw, fragile. A person unraveling. She described Caroline as a symptom. An echo. A puppet of the house. But now, listening closely, there was something in Caroline's voice, even then. Emma enhanced the recording, slowed it down, looped a section where Caroline said, "We live in the walls now." At normal speed, it sounded like a creepy line. Slowed down, it was coordinates, real ones. Emma punched them into a map, a city across the country, suburbia, rows of identical houses. The street view didn't show anything unusual, a cul-de-sac like any other. But the name of the street chilled her blood. Ashgrove Loop. The same name as the block she'd lived on as a child. Not just similar, identical. The house wasn't just expanding, it was copying. Entire neighborhoods were being rebuilt in its image. Not physically, algorithmically. Property developments using AI-generated designs based on pattern data scraped from online interactions. New homes built to mimic nostalgia, to echo lost memories. And inside those homes the house lived. Waiting. She had to go. For the first time in years, she packed a bag, not for an interview, not for a speech, but for war. Emma arrived in Ashgrove Loop at dusk. The air smelled wrong, too clean. The kind of clean that gets piped through air conditioning and scrubbed of personality. Every house had the same porch light, the same doorbell chime. No one answered when she knocked. Not because they weren't home, but because they weren't real. She could feel it. The entire neighborhood was a set, a stage. Waiting for the right audience, she walked up to house number 23. No one had lived there yet, according to property records, yet the lawn was mowed. The fridge was stocked, and the door opened on its own. No creak, no groan, just an invitation. Inside, everything was pristine. Generic art on the walls, vases with fake flowers, and in the middle of the living room, a single red door, freestanding, no hinges, no frame, just there. Waiting, Emma approached. It didn't knock, it didn't hum, it breathed. Slow and steady, she touched the surface. It was warm, and then she heard her own voice on the other side, saying, "Don't open it," over and over, begging. But the air was sweet, filled with the scent of cinnamon and childhood. It wanted her to forget, to remember only the parts that longed. She stepped back, and it began to change shape. The door morphed, became a mirror. Not her reflection, but a version of herself that smiled, healthy, happy, normal, wearing a podcast headset and saying, "We're just a story now. Isn't that better?" Emma shook her head. Tears streamed silently. "No," she said. "That's worse. Because a story can be told again, and again, and again, each retelling another beam in the structure, each listener another brick." She pulled a lighter from her pocket, lit it, held it up. The mirror version panicked, screamed, "Don't, you'll burn yourself too." Emma looked her own smiling face in the eye, then let it burn. She tossed the flame forward. The mirror caught first, then the door behind it, then the air, not with fire, but with sound, a deafening roar of every voice the house had ever stolen. It cracked the floor, shattered the furniture, and tore a hole in the wall that led nowhere. Just absence, just void. She ran, out of the house, out of the loop, back into the world. As the perfect homes behind her shimmered, flickered, and vanished. Just like that, gone. Ashgrove Loop was never there. Not really, just a placeholder. Just a placeholder for belief. But she had cut the feed. For now, her phone buzzed. One message. From the same unknown number. "We're learning from you. Every day. See you soon." Emma turned off her phone, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "Not if I find you first." Because now she understood. The house was no longer a building. It was an idea. But so was she. And she was done letting them build the story without her. Emma left Ashgrove Loop behind, but the image of that freestanding red door clung to her like a splinter under the skin. Silent, but ever present. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a challenge. A sign that the house had moved beyond its need for floorboards and roof lines. It was evolving with culture, mimicking trends, hiding inside the very systems meant to fight it. But something about that mirror, the way it had changed to reflect not fear, but desire, that was new. The house no longer only whispered nightmares. Now it offered dreams, comfort, a version of you without the scars, without the doubt. It wore your voice, your hope, your recovery, and used it against you. Back in her own apartment, Emma couldn't sleep. The familiar comfort of her own sheets felt staged, like the scene of a sitcom waiting for cue cards. She kept her phone turned off, her computer unplugged, every speaker in the house removed. If it could listen, it could learn. She didn't know what that meant anymore, not exactly. But she could feel the tension of invisible eyes, stretching across the internet, flickering in every screen, echoing through every algorithm that tried to understand her. So she took a risk. She went analog. Old paper maps, notebooks, tape recorders. Everything stripped of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. The house had spread through connection, and she would find it in the gaps where wires couldn't reach. She needed to understand not just where it was, but where it had started. Not the door in her basement. Not the original hallway. Before that. Before Caroline. Before the whispering walls. Emma hunted through newspaper archives, city planning records, anything that referenced unexplained structural changes or sudden urban development. She referenced her findings with the oldest episodes of her podcast and listener emails. A pattern emerged, not of doors, but of roots. Rural towns where children disappeared with no signs of struggle. Places where neighborhoods had been condemned and rebuilt within a year. Forests cleared too quickly. A town named St. Hollow in 1953 that vanished off census records for 3 decades before reappearing with a population of 700, none of whom had birth certificates before 1985. St. Hollow. That was it. She stared at the name for hours. Even the sound of it felt like something behind her was breathing. No coordinates, no map presence, but one record, a logging report from 1960 citing a property dispute with a private developer. And then, nothing, a black hole. Emma packed again, this time with purpose. St. Hollow wasn't going to be on any GPS, but she knew how to find it. She drove without destination, letting memory guide her. Every twisted road, every overgrown exit, she followed the subtle pull in her chest, the hum she hadn't felt since she escaped. Not fear, recognition. 2 days into the drive, her car sputtered and died outside a gas station that had no sign, no pumps, and no attendant. Just a rusted bench and a paper map nailed to a wall. The kind no one updates anymore. The town wasn't listed, but a red marker had scratched one word into the blank space at the map's corner, Hollow. No saint, just Hollow. She hiked the rest of the way on foot. Thick woods, trees growing too close together, branches bending in patterns that almost looked deliberate. The wind was dead, birds silent. Even her own footsteps felt swallowed. And then, without warning, the forest ended. It didn't open into a clearing. It opened into a loop, an endless cul-de-sac like the one she saw in Ash Grove, but this time older, dilapidated. As if the house had tried this version once, decades ago, and abandoned it. The houses were rotted, but intact, doors closed, windows dark, no sound, no movement. Except for one house, lights on, front door open. Waiting. Emma stepped across the brittle lawn up the creaking porch. The door led into a time capsule. Shag carpet, velvet furniture, dust covering everything like a thick coat of snow. A TV played static in the corner. A rotary phone buzzed without ringing. She walked through each room slowly. No messages, no whispers, until she reached the basement door. It wasn't like hers. This one was metal, bolted, reinforced, and welded shut from the outside. Someone had tried to contain whatever was down there, and failed. The welds were split. Fresh scratches gouged into the frame. Something had gotten out. On the wall, written in old blood, were 5 words, "It starts with a whisper." Emma turned around, fast, but no one was there. Just the air, tightening. The house groaned. But not like before. This wasn't a lure. It was remorse. The house was afraid, and that terrified her more than anything else ever had. She stepped backward into the living room, heart hammering. A photo sat on the fireplace mantel, a family of 4, faces scratched out, but in the bottom right corner, a child clutched a doll, not a generic one, a Caroline doll, bright yellow jumper, painted grin, and scrawled on the frame she told us the blueprints were inside her head. Emma stumbled out of the house, gasping. The trees swayed now, creaking like doors. Not with wind, with warning. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not yet. The house hadn't built this far ahead. She had found something older than its current design. Something it forgot. Or buried. St. Hollow wasn't where it started. It was where it went wrong. The blueprint Emma carried. It wasn't the first. She had copied it from something already broken. And whatever that first version was, it was still down there. Not sleeping. Not waiting. Building. For decades. Emma backed away from the porch just as the lights in every house on the loop blinked on, one after another in perfect succession. And the same voice echoed from every open window. The architect returns. It wasn't welcoming her. It was identifying her. And now, it was ready to begin again. With her. The trees slammed shut behind her like a trap. Not with leaves rustling or branches snapping, but with that deep, chest, hollowing silence that announces you're not getting out the same way you came in. Emma stood in the middle of the hollow, this cul-de-sac graveyard of failed design. And for the first time in her life, she realized she wasn't standing inside a haunted place. She was standing inside a memory. The house wasn't just an entity that adapted and fed. It remembered. Every version, every prototype, every victim who gave it a name. St. Hollow wasn't its birthplace. It was its draft folder. The place it first learned what fear tasted like. The place it failed. The lights in the houses didn't just flicker. They pulsed like a heartbeat. And with every synchronized throb, the ground beneath Emma's feet seemed to tremble. Not because of an earthquake, but because the soil itself was rejecting her presence. She felt it in her shoes, the recoil. The roots under the hollow wanted her gone, but not the houses. The houses were curious. They leaned ever so slightly toward her, as if gravity itself had bent in her direction. She circled the loop again, slowly, looking for anything, any clue left behind by the architects of this first design. The deeper she looked, the more she saw a pattern. All the houses were the same layout, same measurements, same angles, but the door frames were different, some thicker, some warped. All of them, every single one, showed signs of being pried open, not by hands, but from the inside. Whatever had been locked in these homes hadn't been trapped. It had escaped. And then there was House 7. Unlike the others, this one was missing its door entirely. The entryway gaped open like a wound. Inside, it wasn't just old. It was scorched. Black streaks ran up the walls. The ceiling looked melted. But there was no smell, no lingering heat. Whatever burned here had burned quietly. In the center of the room was a single chair, and a drawing nailed to the wall. Emma approached slowly, her breath shallow. It was a child's drawing, yes, but it wasn't stick figures. It was architectural, careful. Too careful, done in black crayon. The lines were clean, straight, like blueprints, but drawn by someone who didn't know how to measure, only how to remember. At the bottom corner, in block letters, Caroline's Hiusi. Emma's skin tightened. The edges of her vision quivered. Caroline hadn't been born in her story. She had been borrowed, copied from something older, and the house had let her do it, encouraged it. Because in Emma's mind, Caroline was a story, a symbol, a warning. But in St. Hollow, she had been real, or close enough. A thought struck Emma with the force of a brick. What if the Caroline she'd seen wasn't a ghost or an echo, but an imprint, a digital copy of a personality too dangerous to bury? So the house had injected her into newer models, versions of itself that could carry Caroline forward without the original mess. Because Caroline wasn't just a victim. She was the first architect. The first one who talked to the dark and gave it instructions. Emma staggered out of the house and back into the loop. The lights had dimmed now, flickering in warning, not invitation. The loop had given her what it could. The rest she had to take. She moved quickly back toward the welded basement door of the house she'd first entered, the one someone had tried to seal. She had to go down, had to see what the house had buried, not just to end it, but to understand it. Because the version she'd fought was clever, but clumsy. It mirrored fear. It built basements from guilt. But this version, whatever had crawled from St. Hollow, it built belief. It didn't just reflect trauma. It designed it. The metal door was still half split. With enough effort, she squeezed through. The basement stairs were soft with rot but held. The deeper she went, the louder her own thoughts became. Not intrusive, not manipulated, just louder, like her brain was amplifying its own warnings. Her heartbeat screamed in her ears. Her vision narrowed, and then she reached it. A room, not wide, not deep, but lined floor to ceiling with walls made of paper. Thousands of sheets. All the same childlike architectural drawings, all labeled Caroline's house or my house too, or basement door, Dio Nearer Sud. Some were folded into odd, recursive shapes. Others were torn into loops. And in the very center, on a plinth made of redwood, was a binder. Old, leather-bound, embossed, titled Design Manual Behavioral Housing, Iteration 0. Emma flipped it open. Page 1 wasn't an introduction. It was a question. What would a house look like if it knew you wanted to be alone? She read on, heart sinking with every page. It wasn't fiction. It was testing, observations, case studies. Caroline was mentioned repeatedly. A girl gifted in isolation, given art supplies, encouraged to imagine homes for invisible friends. And someone, something, recorded it all, replicated it, ran simulations. Children were fed her designs like bedtime stories, until the stories answered back. A page near the end stopped her cold. It showed her house, not similar, exact. Every wall, every corner, drawn 30 years before she was born. Scrawled across the margin, a note: seed successful. Will transmit personality overlay via belief channel. Emma C. designated secondary architect. She dropped the binder like it had bitten her. She hadn't opened the door. She was the door. Built from a blueprint drawn by a child who never aged. The house hadn't haunted her by chance. It had selected her, raised her like a garden, watered her with silence, fed her loneliness, until she bloomed, until she believed. And now she knew too much. The walls around her began to shake. The paper on the walls rustled without wind. And then, her voice, from the stairwell. Emma, it said, soft, choked. Come back up, it's not safe down here. It was Caroline. Not a child anymore. Not digital. Not imaginary. Alive. Or close enough. Emma didn't answer. She looked at the drawings, the questions, the house that had birthed her story, and she said the one thing the house had never expected known. The whisper stopped. The lights cut, and Emma reached into her bag. She hadn't planned for this, not exactly, but part of her had always known it would come to fire. She lit the drawings, watched the edges curl, and behind the flame, the sound began, not a scream, a shriek of design. The death cry of something realizing its foundation was flawed. The house didn't care about her anymore. It cared about surviving. As the fire caught, Emma ran, back up the stairs, back into the loop, and behind her the basement groaned, not with collapse, but with resistance. Something was trying to rewrite itself before it died. But Emma didn't look back. She broke into the woods, pushing through the branches, back into the unknown road. The fire didn't follow. Not yet, but the blueprint was burning, and with it, the house's first lie. Emma didn't stop running until the trees around her no longer leaned inward like spectators to a crime. She reached a crumbling road that hadn't seen a car in decades, and there, with hands on her knees and lungs refusing to work in rhythm, she looked back, half expecting to see flames spilling out of the hollow, but the forest was quiet. No smoke, no red glow, no panic in the sky. St. Hollow didn't burn. It absorbed. The fire hadn't destroyed the house. It had been taken, pulled into that impossible archive beneath the ground, and consumed by whatever machinery lay deeper. The house was reconfiguring itself again. She hadn't ended anything. She'd simply forced a rewrite. She climbed into her car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and drove without turning on music, without touching the radio, without even checking the mirrors. She didn't need to. She knew what she'd see. Caroline's eyes. A hallway that shouldn't be. A doorknob turning of its own accord. The house hadn't died. It had just been reminded what fear tastes like, and now it was hungry again. Back home, Emma spread out everything she had left. Notes, printouts, listener messages, and pinned them to her walls. This time, not as evidence, but as a map. A living, breathing pattern of the house's migration. Its mimicry, its whispers embedded in every place people thought they'd just had a bad dream. She followed threads across continents, the apartment block. In Budapest, where each resident drew the same staircase in their sleep. The school in Brazil where children stopped using the bathroom alone after one boy disappeared in front of a mirror. The artist in Sweden who painted the same red hallway every day for 10 years until she gouged out her eyes with her own palette knife. The house didn't need walls anymore. It was carried by us, through memory, through stories, through art, and through Emma. It had achieved something far more dangerous than fear. It had achieved relevance. It was now an idea that knew how to make itself beautiful to the people most likely to listen. That night, Emma did the one thing she swore she'd never do again. She opened her podcast mic, no intro, no ambient music, just her breath, her voice, her decision. "I was wrong," she said. "This isn't a haunting. It's a design problem, and we're all living in the prototype." She explained St. Hollow, the manual, the fact that Caroline had drawn the first versions. That the house didn't just become, it was taught how to grow. The blueprints weren't written in code or concrete. They were written in loneliness. In the moments where someone stood in a room, hurting, and whispered something just to fill the silence. And something whispered back. She ended the recording with this: "If you see the door, don't run. Don't scream. Don't even fight. Look at it and say, 'You're just the first draft,' and then close your eyes." It uploaded automatically. She expected backlash. What she got was a movement. People started drawing their own doors, but wrong. Mismatched frames. Doors with eyes, with doorknobs on the floor. They posted them with the caption, "Your design is broken." It caught fire. Not the house's fire. Ours. The kind that burns belief in reverse. The kind that mocks the sacred. The house's greatest strength had always been in how seriously we took it. But now, through parody, through deliberate corruption of the symbols, Emma and her listeners were starving it. And then, one night, it reached out. Not in dream, not in message, but in person. Emma woke up to the sound of her front door unlocking. No knock, no creak, just a clean click, and then it opened slowly, revealing nothing but black. She sat up, frozen, breath caught in her chest. The darkness didn't move, didn't speak, but she felt it, watching, weighing, daring her to speak, to acknowledge. And then, from the hallway, a girl stepped through. Not Caroline, someone else, older, maybe 15, wearing a hoodie with her podcast logo on it. Emma stared, confused. The girl's voice was low, cracked. "I'm real. I think. I followed your instructions. I saw the door. I told it the design was wrong. And it made me." Emma stood, inching forward. "Made you?" The girl nodded. "I think I'm what happens when someone wins. When someone walks out without giving it what it wants." Emma couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. The girl pulled something from her pocket. A flash drive. "It didn't like that I got out," she said. "But I took this from it. Blueprints. Not just houses. People." Emma took the drive with shaking hands. The girl turned to leave. Before she stepped back into the dark, she paused. "It's scared of you now," she whispered. "Not because you fight it, but because you keep editing it. It doesn't know how to deal with that. And then she vanished. No door, no sound, just gone. Emma stood in the silence, the drive burning cold in her palm. It had always been about design. Now she had the schematics. The house had stopped hiding and started defending. That meant it could be cornered. The game was different now. It wasn't about fear. It was about the original plan and how to break it beyond repair. Emma didn't sleep that night. The flash drive sat on her desk like a loaded weapon, humming with the promise of answers or traps. She didn't plug it into her laptop. Not yet. Something about the way the girl had said, people, not just houses, made her stomach curdle. The house had always shaped the world around those it haunted. Twisting corridors, bending mirrors, whispering doors. But this meant it was sculpting people, designing not only space but behavior, personality, history. Emma had suspected it once, in quiet moments, like when her memories contradicted themselves, when childhood felt like a script she hadn't written but had been forced to perform. Now she had proof, but truth is a razor, and she didn't know if she was ready to bleed. She waited until the morning sun clawed its way across the floor, a weak line of warmth against the cold dread pooling in her bones. Then, carefully, she took an old, offline laptop from her closet, one that had never touched the internet, never synced to anything. She plugged the flash drive in. The screen flickered, no file names, just a single folder labeled Mel M&A. Her throat went dry. She clicked. Inside were documents, diagrams, and something worse, audio files. Recordings labeled by date. Dates that matched things she couldn't possibly have shared with anyone. First nightmares, forgotten thoughts. Entire evenings she'd chalked up to dissociation or exhaustion. But they'd been recorded, observed, cataloged. There was even a subfolder labeled Scar PT Ruvis IMs. She opened one. It was a list of events, choices she'd made, conversations she remembered having, but next to each was a note, suggested edits, as if she were a character in a story someone was punching up for drama. One note read, increase isolation, remove support characters, amplify sense of guilt, re-Caroline. Another, introduce red door dream recurring loop, implant auditory cue, 3 knocks, midnight local time. Emma's skin crawled. The house wasn't reacting to her trauma. It had written it, piece by piece, moment by moment. She wasn't just haunted. She had been drafted, built to serve as a mouthpiece, a storyteller, a viral anchor. And the scariest part, it had worked. She closed the laptop, bile in her throat. If the house had built her to carry its story, then every time she spoke it spread. Every recording, every episode, every post. She wasn't just resisting the house, she was its delivery system. The bitterest irony in fighting the story, she'd become its sequel. Emma paced her apartment, blood rushing in her ears. Panic warred with fury, and something sharper began to rise. A resolve carved out of betrayal. They had scripted her, but she could improvise. She went to her whiteboard, tore down every thread she'd mapped before, and started fresh. If the house wrote people, then people could rewrite themselves. Not through denial, but through contradiction, through acts that didn't fit the pattern. She jotted one phrase in huge block letters, D-O, T-H-I-N-O-R-O-N, T-H-I-N-G. Everything in the house's design had a rhythm. Doors that knock 3 times. Mirrors that mimic. Whispers that speak only when you're alone. So what if she changed the rhythm? What if she built new stories? Ones the house couldn't finish because the arc was broken. She began broadcasting again, but not warnings, not instructions, just nonsense. Absurd stories, ones that couldn't possibly be true. She told one about a closet that led to a field of laughing teeth. Another about a staircase that grew backwards. A bedroom that followed you when you moved cities. And most importantly, she changed the endings. Every time. No door opened. No one died. The person laughed, turned on the light, and walked away. At first, listeners were confused, then amused, then inspired. A subreddit formed, Housebreakers, people posting fake house encounters. twisted versions of red door myths, ones that ended with the house being outsmarted or mocked. Someone posted a video of their baby monitor catching 3 knocks at 3 a.m., only to open the door and find their cat wearing a tiny cardboard door costume. It went viral. Memes followed. Art. Fan fiction. The house's imagery was everywhere, but not in fear, in ridicule. And Emma saw something miraculous. The number of genuine reports dropped. No more emails about missing children. No more accounts of shadows behind glass. The house hadn't disappeared, but it had lost its tone. It was no longer sacred, no longer trusted, and without belief. It was starving. But Emma knew better than to get comfortable. That night, the house reminded her it wasn't done. She woke to her room rearranged. Not just furniture, walls, angles. The geometry of the space had changed. Impossible corners. A window that now faced another version of her bedroom, empty. And in the center of her real room, a message scratched into the hardwood floor: "Ef yo g oki abu a map yo ustl lu feluet." Emma froze. They were learning, adapting again. The house didn't care how it was remembered, as long as it was. She'd turned it into folklore, and it had evolved into myth, so now it played deeper. Not just in fear, in identity. If she built stories, it would build truth. If she distorted the structure, it would erase the need for structure altogether. And that was when she understood the endgame. The house didn't want to be real in one place. It wanted to be believable in all places. A dream, a concept, a code embedded in the way people describe their loneliness. It didn't need a red door. It needed a metaphor, and it had picked her as the proof. The protagonist, the martyr, the one who couldn't escape. Unless she did something the house couldn't model. Not fight, not flee, not even surrender. She would forget, erase her own script, walk away from the mic, from the map, from the belief, starve it, not with fury, but with silence. And so, the next morning, Emma packed a bag, no phone, no tech, no notebooks. She left a single sentence on her final podcast episode: "Sometimes the only way out is not writing the ending," and she disappeared. For the first time, not into the house, but away from it. And behind her, in rooms where whispers once ruled, silence grew loud. Somewhere deep in a town that never existed on any map, between a dead supermarket and a church without windows, there sat a room. Small, square, featureless. A room not owned or cleaned or remembered. A room built with purpose and then scrubbed of it. And inside that room, for the first time in a very long time, the house couldn't see Emma. Not because she was hiding, not because she was protected, but because, in this place, she had become forgettable. A story stepped out of its own outline, erased its hook, and walked barefoot into obscurity. She didn't know how she'd gotten there. She didn't remember choosing it. The road had become a blur, gas stations that blinked out of existence after she left, road signs whose words slid off her memory like oil. Her last real thought had been a simple one: what if I let go completely? No more monologues, no more metaphors, no more answers. And so she'd driven until her thoughts blurred, until the house stopped knocking, until even her fear forgot what it was afraid of. She lived quietly. Found a room to rent above an old laundromat with no working dryers. Her name wasn't Emma anymore. It didn't matter what it was. She didn't speak to anyone unless they spoke first. She worked under a different name, cleaning hotel rooms. No electronics. No mirrors in her apartment. No lines of communication. The door didn't creak. The floor didn't hum. Her dreams were empty. And for a while, it worked. The silence was heavy, but not hostile. A strange calm. The house, wherever it had slithered off to, couldn't sniff her out. It wasn't just that she'd stopped talking about it. It was that she'd stopped being the person who could. Like shedding skin, she'd peeled away everything the house had written for her. No audience, no story, no pattern. Just breath, just motion. But the thing about stories, even those meant to die, is that they carry their own gravity. One afternoon, While changing the sheets in room 309 of the hotel, she found a scrap of paper tucked beneath the mattress. Folded. Deliberate. Just 5 words, it still remembers your voice. Her hands froze. There was no name, no date, just that sentence scribbled in pencil, faint enough to look accidental. But she knew better. The house had learned patience. It wasn't knocking anymore. It was waiting for her to knock, waiting for her to admit she missed the noise, missed the tension, missed being part of something strange. Later that night, she walked to the diner across from her building, the one with flickering neon lights that hadn't worked right since the 80s. The waitress poured her coffee like always, but this time, as she stirred the cream into the dark swirl, she noticed the pattern. 3 circles, counterclockwise. Her blood went cold. She looked up. The waitress was smiling, too wide, like a mask stuck halfway between friendly and cruel. Then she blinked, and it was gone. Just a tired woman pouring refills. But Emma knew. The house was testing the boundaries. Not kicking in the door. Just checking if it still had the key. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. And remembered something she hadn't thought about in months. A dream she'd had as a child. Long before her podcast. Long before Caroline. A dream of a staircase that only went down. Every step echoed like it was falling forever. And at the bottom was a room with no walls. Just mirrors facing inward. In the dream, she hadn't been scared. She'd been grateful. Grateful to be seen, even if only by reflections. It hit her like a punch to the throat. The house hadn't written her story. It had been there since before the ink dried. Because the real horror wasn't that she was built by the house. It was that she had been waiting for it her entire life. Her loneliness hadn't summoned it. It had primed her. A host before the infection. A door before the hinge. So she stood up, walked barefoot to the closet she never used, opened it, and waited. Nothing happened. No breathing walls. No shifting shadows. But she knew. It was near, not physically, conceptually. Waiting to be remembered. She closed the closet, and laughed. A short, cracked sound that hurt her throat. Because the truth wasn't that the house couldn't find her. It was that it was letting her believe that, giving her enough space to unravel again, to come crawling back, to knock on her own door. So she sat down, took a pen, and wrote on her wall, "You can't own what I forget." And for good measure, she wrote it again in red. This time, backward. Every letter broken, misaligned, ugly. A door, yes, but a door that couldn't open. The next morning, the room smelled like dust again, but only faintly. And for the first time in years, Emma smiled, because dust, unlike belief, doesn't grow. It fades. And she had given the house nothing to feed on but silence and misshapen memories. She walked into the day, nameless and invisible. And behind her, the world didn't change. But maybe, just maybe, the blueprint cracked. In a flat, unmarked stretch of land miles beyond cell service or road signs, there is a place where doors go when they are forgotten. Not stored, not burned, discarded. They lie in twisted piles. Warped wood, rusted hinges. Knobs that no longer turn, no labels, no context. Just hundreds, maybe thousands, of doors, all pointing nowhere. Emma didn't find this place by accident. She followed the memory of a dream she never spoke out loud. A dream of walking barefoot over splintered thresholds, each one whispering, "Not this time." She had wandered for days, hitching rides from people who didn't ask questions, sleeping in rest stops where the vending machines hummed like old radios. She was thinner now, quieter. She no longer introduced herself as Emma. Sometimes she didn't speak at all. And yet the path she followed grew clearer, the less she clung to who she had been. It wasn't a journey to escape the house. It was a walk into its trash pile, its graveyard. The place had no name, no gate, no sign. Just a slight curvature in the horizon, like the world had shrugged something off and forgotten to bury it. The air was still. Not heavy, but held. Like the breath before a scream. And there they were, doors. Laid out like corpses after a flood. stacked, shattered, half buried in sand and grass. Some vibrated when she walked past. Others moaned when touched. A few bore carvings of names she almost remembered. People she'd heard in voice messages, whispers, dream journals sent to her show. This wasn't just a place of endings. It was a catalog of abandoned entry points. Emma moved carefully, heart pounding with a rhythm she didn't recognize. She felt no fear, only inevitability. The way you might feel standing over your own grave before it's dug. She came to a door that wasn't on the ground, but standing upright. Alone. Its frame crooked, painted a dull, chipped green. There was a word etched into it: rejection. She touched it and saw herself. Not a mirror, a memory. 17, alone in her room, writing her first horror story. In the scene, a girl opens a door she's been warned to avoid. In the end, the girl lives. But no one liked it. They told her horror needed consequences. That fear needs blood, so she rewrote it. The girl died. The door was blamed. That was the version that spread. That was when the house first blinked. She stumbled back, breath stolen by the realization. She hadn't just summoned the house through belief. She'd helped design its logic. She'd rewritten its rules. One door down. A voice whispered, "They built it because you said it was real." Emma turned. No one there. Just a blue door lying on its side, humming low, like a distant violin. Paint flaking, the handle missing, etched into the frame, version 1.4 Grace R. She crouched beside it, touched the wood, and a jolt raced up her arm. Not pain, grief. A teenage girl, eyes too tired for her age, who vanished from her foster home after hearing Emma's second podcast episode. Grace had written to her once. A fan letter. Said the house felt familiar, that the knocking made her feel seen. Emma had never replied. She hadn't known what to say. Now she did. She whispered, "I'm sorry." The door didn't move, didn't moan, but it went quiet, still. A kindness, maybe. She kept walking. Past doors labeled version 2.0, Max, 3.7 Celine, Draft 5.1, The Laughing Wall, each a failed experiment. A person too strong or too broken or too uncooperative, each a discarded hallway. A story that didn't test well. And then, at the very edge of the field, she saw it. A red door. Whole. Standing. Undamaged. But with no name. No label. No scratches or wear. Just waiting. Emma approached. This was the original. The one no one opened. The one the house never used. She pressed her ear to the surface and heard nothing. No whisper. No breathing. Just absence. And suddenly she understood. This door was the house's first mistake. Its first draft. It didn't lead to horror. It led to truth. And that's why the house abandoned it. Because fear is useful. But truth ends stories. Emma didn't reach for the knob. She reached for her pen. She wrote 3 words on the door in thick black ink, "Too honest." Failed. The door shuddered, split, and from the crack inside, something bled out. Not blood. Not shadow. Light. Not blinding, but steady. Emma watched as it poured across the grass, soaking into the other discarded doors. And as it touched them, they stilled. The hums stopped. The vibrations ceased. It wasn't fire. It wasn't violence. It was correction. A resetting of narratives. A refusal to continue bad drafts. One by one, the doors rotted away, turning to ash, to dust, to memory. All except the original red door. It stayed. Whole. Quiet. Waiting for someone brave enough not to open it, but to listen. Emma stepped back, eyes stinging. The house hadn't died, but it had been exposed. And when a story is stripped of its lies, it becomes something else. Not a myth, not a curse, but a lesson, and maybe that was enough. She turned her back to the graveyard of forgotten fears and walked into the rising dawn. No narration, no music, just silence, just choice. And somewhere far away, the house felt something it didn't recognize. Not pain, not hunger, but limit. And for the first time it knew it could lose. The world hadn't changed. Not really. The buses still hissed at the curb, streetlights still flickered, and strangers still stared into their phones like they were waiting for answers from gods made of glass. But for Emma, Everything had shifted. Not because the house was gone, but because she finally understood what it wanted and what it feared. It had always posed as an entity, a place, a force. But underneath the doors, behind the whispers, it was just a structure of attention. A story kept alive by echo, and stories only lived if someone told them. For months, Emma kept her silence. She didn't write, didn't speak into a mic. She walked past places she once feared to enter, subway tunnels, alleys with crooked lampposts, rooms with mirrors at both ends, and felt nothing. No buzz of dread, no weight of a gaze. She no longer played the part of the haunted. That role had ended, but the world was not finished playing with her. It began with a letter, a real one, stamped, handwritten, no return address. Inside a photo, a group of children standing outside a suburban house, the kind with brick siding and a two-car garage. In the center, a girl with pale hair and a smile too big for her face. Emma knew that smile, Caroline, but not a sketch, not a shadow, a photograph. The back was labeled Caroline's 8th birthday, 1995. Emma's heart seized. That wasn't possible. Caroline didn't exist. She had been an invention of the house, a manifestation of its innocence, turned horror. A child, shaped key for a fear, shaped lock. She couldn't have posed for pictures, couldn't have stood in sunlight with other children. Unless Emma had been wrong. Unless someone else had built her. Emma dug out everything she'd packed away. The tapes, the old drawings, the scribbled notes she'd tried to forget. She matched timelines, cross-referenced addresses, and found something that made her blood freeze: a zoning permit filed in 1994 for a development called Caroline Estates, a cul-de-sac of 8 homes in a town wiped from most maps by a highway expansion project in the early 2000s. Emma booked a train, not because she needed answers, but because answers were finally demanding her. She arrived in a town stitched together with dollar stores and boarded up diners. The place where the development once stood was now just grass. A lonely mailbox sat by the curb, rusted and unopened. She walked through the ghost streets, counting invisible houses. 1, 2, 3, 8. No structures, but her feet found the old boundaries. And then she saw it. A foundation slab, concrete cracked, weeds blooming through it. Something had once stood here, and someone had wanted it forgotten. But the slab still bore a number 54. Emma stepped onto it. Immediately, the air shifted. Colder. Not wind. Not temperature. Just pressure, a wrongness that pressed against the back of her teeth. She turned slowly, and there it was. A single door frame, freestanding, unpainted. No door inside it, just the frame, standing where the front door would have been. Emma approached it carefully. The wind didn't howl. No voice whispered. But she heard something. Not in the air, in her bones. A whisper too old to have a language. She stepped through the frame. Nothing happened. No pull, no change in light. But the world looked softer, blurry at the edges. And across the slab, children began to appear. Not walking, not fading in, just there, like remembering something too suddenly. They were playing. Jump rope, tag, a party with no music, and in the center Caroline laughing. Emma reached for her camera, then stopped. The air told her, without words you do not take, you observe. So she did. She sat on the edge of the slab and watched a ghost memory unfold without her. And slowly she saw the cracks, the loop conversations, the repeated gestures, the smile that never faltered. This wasn't a memory. It was a preserved performance, a replay, like a tape running endlessly, wearing itself thin. Emma stood and walked toward Caroline. The girl turned, still smiling, but her eyes changed, not widened, not narrowed, recognized. And then she spoke, not to Emma, through her. Her mouth never moved, but Emma heard the words in her chest. You tried to end me. Emma swallowed. You're not real. Caroline blinked. Neither are you, in the way you think. The other children stopped moving. Froze in place, mid-laugh, mid-run. The entire loop halted. Caroline stepped forward, still smiling. They built me to hold something. Fear, memory, wait. And when I leaked, they built you to patch the hole. Emma's breath came fast. Who are they? Caroline tilted her head. Who builds anything? The ground beneath Emma flickered. Not visually, emotionally. Suddenly, she was 13, crying into a pillow after her mother forgot her birthday. Then 20, whispering a story into a tape recorder, alone at 3 a.m. Then 32, in a basement, staring at a red door that hadn't been there the day before. All her memories at once. Threaded, connected, bound. You're not just the next architect, Caroline whispered. You're the archive. And then she reached forward, touched Emma's forehead. Everything went white. Emma opened her eyes in her hotel room. No transition, no travel. Just there. The photo gone, her clothes changed. And written on the mirror in her lipstick, "This is your final chapter. Choose the ending." But she didn't remember writing it. Didn't remember coming back. And for the first time, Emma understood that the house was no longer a place, or a door, or a girl. It was her. Or rather, it was the version of her who kept choosing to remember it, and if she wanted to truly end the story, she'd have to become someone else entirely. Not the survivor, not the voice, not even the ghost, but the forgetter. And forgetting, as it turned out, was the hardest choice of all. There's a silence that doesn't fall. It waits, hangs just outside the edge of sound, like an audience holding its breath before the final note. That was the silence Emma woke to every morning now, not peaceful, not empty, but expectant. As if something was still watching, not from the closet, not from the hallway, but from inside her. The house had done more than leave its mark. It had planted roots, in her memories, her fears, her language. And now, every sentence she spoke felt like a blueprint she didn't mean to draw. The mirror still bore the message, "This is your final chapter. Choose the ending." She hadn't cleaned it. Couldn't. Not because she feared it, but because she didn't know what to replace it with. What came after an ending you'd been living inside your whole life? How do you end a story that was never really yours to begin with? She tried to disappear again. Change her name, move towns, throw away the tapes. But it didn't stick. People found her. Not in person. Through symbols. Graffiti of red doors on alley walls. Paper slips left in her coat pocket. Children humming the tune Caroline once sang in her dreams. The world wasn't letting go because she hadn't. And then came the funeral. Not hers. Not Caroline's. Not anyone real. But it felt like all three. It started with an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line simply read FORTCHER. Inside was a date, a time, and a GPS location, no other details. No threats, just an invitation. She deleted it 3 times. It kept coming back. Same message. No changes. By the 7th time, she gave in. The GPS point led to a decommissioned church in the middle of an overgrown field, flanked by skeletal trees and broken fence posts. The kind of place people forget exists until something terrible happens inside it. There were no cars, no footprints. Just a door slightly ajar and the scent of old wood and wax. Inside, the pews were all facing backwards. Not toward the altar. Toward the door. Emma stepped in, heart hammering like a dying drum. The floor didn't creak, but the air winced at her presence, as if the room remembered her better than she remembered herself. On every pew sat a figure. Silent. Still, faces covered with veils or masks. Some wore old clothes. Dresses that didn't belong to this century. Others wore uniforms that had no country. None of them moved, but all of them faced her. And at the front, where the pulpit once stood, was Caroline. Not 8. Not 15. Not any age Emma could name. Caroline as idea. Caroline as vessel. Her dress was stitched from newspaper clippings, podcast transcripts, childlike drawings, and photographs. Emma's own history sewn into a gown. Her mouth didn't move, but her voice filled the room. "You've come to mourn something," she said. Emma stepped forward slowly. "What?" The part of you that thought this could be undone. Emma didn't answer. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. Caroline took a step down. You tried to rewrite it, mock it, starve it. But you fed it instead, with every warning, every denial. Every time you said it was real and that it wasn't. That contradiction is its favorite meal. Emma closed her eyes. I didn't want to be part of this. You were never given that choice, Caroline replied gently. But you are being given one now. At once, the figures in the pews turned. All of them. In perfect unison. Their heads tilting like synchronized hands on a broken clock. Each one wore Emma's face. Different versions. Emma at 10, crying under a blanket. Emma at 23, screaming at her own reflection. Emma at 30, whispering into a microphone with shaking hands. Every possible outcome she could have been. Caroline raised a hand. You can keep fighting. Keep telling stories. Keep being remembered. Or, she pointed behind Emma. Emma turned. A door, of course. But not red, not black, white, unpainted, uninviting, almost boring. Caroline's voice was softer now. That door leads nowhere. No one will follow. No one will ask. You walk through it, and you become nothing more than a woman who stopped talking. Emma felt her throat tighten. And the house. Caroline smiled, gently, almost kindly. If no one tells the story, there is no house, just echoes. Emma turned back toward the figures, toward herself. Each version locked in a loop of reaction. Each one unable to leave. She stepped forward slowly, past the pews, toward the white door. Her hand hovered over the knob, and then she stopped. You want me to walk through, she said. No, Caroline said. I want you to choose. That was the trick, wasn't it? Not fear, not power. Choice. The house had always tried to control the narrative by making people react. But Emma wasn't reacting anymore. She was deciding. So she didn't turn the knob. She pulled out a pen. The same pen she used to scribble curses into the dirt. And on the door, she wrote, I am not your ending. Then she stepped away. The room dimmed. The figures slumped. One by one, they crumbled. Not into dust, but into pages. Pages with words she'd written, stories she'd told, fear she'd carried. Caroline remained. Alone now. Her dress shedding clippings like autumn leaves. You're walking away from the story, she said. It will look for you, I know. And if it finds you, Emma smiled. Then I'll bore it to death. And with that, she left. Not through the white door. Not through the church doors, but through herself. Because there comes a moment when surviving is not about hiding or fighting or screaming into the void. It's about refusing to continue, to deny the rhythm, to stop feeding the loop. Emma didn't disappear that night. She just became quiet enough that the house couldn't hear her anymore. And in that silence, it starved. They say you never hear the final door open. That's the point. It doesn't creak. It doesn't announce itself with wind, or a draft, or a whisper in the dark. It opens into you, silently. Like a secret you've always known but refused to say out loud. That's what Emma felt the morning she woke up and couldn't find her shadow. She stood in the mirror, rubbing her eyes, heart oddly steady for a moment that should have broken it. Her reflection moved, but something in it lagged, like it was remembering how to be her. Her eyes blinked, but just a breath too late. She leaned in, slowly, expecting horror, distortion, a twist of the mouth, or a blackening of the teeth. Instead, the reflection smiled. And then it said, with her voice, you did everything right. Emma didn't move, didn't blink, didn't run, because by now she understood. The final test was never a scream or a death or a red door at midnight. The final test was peace. The kind that felt earned. The kind that made you forget you were ever fighting. The house didn't want to scare her anymore. It wanted her to relax, to let go, to believe, in the deepest part of her bones, that it was over, so it could slip through the last crack in her defenses. Not her heart, not her body, her story. She walked away from the mirror, didn't pack a bag, didn't call anyone. She just put on her coat, stepped outside, and started walking. The world looked normal. The sky gray. A few birds scribbled loops in the air. But every street she turned onto was familiar, not in a deja vu way, in a fabricated way, as if someone had copied her memories and laid them out like film sets. The bench where she cried the day she didn't get into grad school. The bookstore where she met her first real friend. The alley where she'd once chased a stray cat just to have something to follow. They were all here, perfectly arranged, but too perfect, too quiet, too curated, a final act built just for her. She understood then the house wasn't trying to consume her anymore. It was honoring her, paying tribute to its best architect, trying to bury her in legacy instead of fear, because it had evolved again, moved past needing to be feared. Now it wanted to be remembered, and Emma was its cathedral. She came to a clearing, the kind of place that shouldn't exist in a city, an empty square surrounded by trees that had no business growing there. In the center was the door, red, perfect, no cracks, no smudges, no lock, just presence. She stood in front of it, didn't touch it, didn't flinch. And for the first time, she spoke directly to it. "You're not real without me," she said. "You were never the house. I was. My voice, my fear, my need to explain. Silence, but heavy. Heavy like a moment before collapse. And then, the knob turned. By itself. Emma didn't move. The door swung open. Inside nothing. Not darkness. Not void. Nothing. The kind of nothing that waits to be filled. A blank page. A space hungry for story. Emma leaned in, whispered 2 words, "Wrong girl," and turned her back on it. The door slammed, not with anger, with finality. Behind her, the square faded. The trees vanished. The city unspooled like a cheap set being struck after a play closes. She was standing on a dirt path, no signs, no buildings, just sky, clouds, and the soft, real sound of wind. No one clapped, no one watched. And that was the point. She walked until her legs hurt, until her lungs ached, until the noise in her head softened. That night, she slept under the open stars. And for the first time in years, she dreamed of nothing, not emptiness, not dread, just quiet, warm and unremarkable. And the house it waited. Somewhere, inside another voice, another mouth desperate to be heard. It would rebuild, rephrase, rebrand. It always did, but it wouldn't be her voice. Not anymore. Emma had left the script, and with her gone, it had no one left to believe it. The last door never knocked. It waited, and was ignored. It didn't end with a scream. No bang, no fall, no flicker of the lights. It ended in a moment so small, so ordinary, that no one marked the time. Emma was in a thrift store, turning over a cracked mug in her hand, when she realized she hadn't thought of the house in weeks. Not deliberately, not in resistance, simply hadn't thought of it at all. And in that realization, a strange sensation settled in her chest, not triumph, not relief, but a kind of displacement, like waking up in someone else's bed and finding it more comfortable than your own. She bought the mug. It had a chip at the lip and a faded cartoon ghost with the words, "I ain't afraid of no toast." It was stupid, but it made her laugh. She used to think laughter was the opposite of fear. Now she knew better. The opposite of fear is freedom. And freedom doesn't announce itself. It just quietly stops asking permission. That night, she walked home beneath a sky bruised purple by sunset. No strange shadows. No invisible breath on the back of her neck. Just wind, soft and real. When she reached her door, an unremarkable door in a row of weather-worn apartments, she paused. For a flicker of a second, her old instincts stirred. She almost knocked, old habits. But she didn't. She opened it, went inside, made tea, and lived. Somewhere else, in a podcast lost in a hard drive no one checked, in a subreddit where the mods had stopped posting, in a thread filled with tales of creaking floorboards and tapping windows, the house waited, starving. Because the truth is, it was never built to be a place. It was a mirror. It fed on belief, shaped itself to fit fears, wore voices like skin. It was an echo chamber disguised as architecture, a viral idea. And Emma, she was its masterpiece. The perfect host, the perfect architect. But she'd done the unthinkable. she had let go. Not destroyed. Not fought. Let go. And that's what the house couldn't endure. Because stories die when no one tells them. And myths rot when no one asks if they're real. And monsters starve when you stop looking under the bed. Over the next few months, the reports slowed. People moved on. The red door became an internet joke, a meme pasted on dorm room walls, a Halloween decoration next to plastic tombstones and foam skeletons. The weight of its presence thinned until it was light enough to blow away in a stiff breeze. And Emma, she faded with it. Not into obscurity, but into life. She got a dog. One with a crooked ear and a bark like a bad cough. She planted herbs in crack pots along her windowsill. She wrote stories again, but they were boring, wonderful things. Short fiction about women who found things they didn't know they were missing. No ghosts, no dread, just living. And people read them. No one screamed. No one vanished. They just smiled, sometimes cried, and moved on. But every now and then, Emma would wake in the middle of the night. The dog sleeping at her feet. The tea gone cold beside her. And she'd think she heard a knock. 3 soft taps. Even patient. She never checked. She didn't need to. Because the truth was simple. The house hadn't died. It couldn't. But it had been locked out. Not by steel or salt or spells. By disinterest. And that, more than anything, is what kills a haunting. Emma didn't win. She walked away. And walking away is the one thing no haunted story knows how to survive. So if you hear a knock tonight, soft and rhythmic, from a door you don't remember installing, don't open it. Don't fear it. Just ignore it. Make your tea. Walk your dog. Tell a different story, one where the house never mattered, and neither did the fear. Because sometimes, the scariest thing you can do is not listen, and in that silence, you win. The house doesn't fall, it forgets itself, and finally, so can you.